Pregnancy is not inherently a disease. Birth is not inherently a medical procedure. But the way that we treat women in childbirth, their partners, and the children afterwards is playing out and reinforcing these myths. We're about 40% C-section rate in our country. If it gets to 100, that is a dystopia. The way that we care for you from start to finish, even the way that you're having sex when this child is conceived, matters as to the well-being and how this child ultimately integrates into the family and the community. If you inject the sperm into the egg and then implant the egg, which is a typical IVF procedure, into the uterus, the perinatal psychologists and prenatal psychologists after the fact observe that those kids, they have lower self-esteem.
The birth of my son, my third baby, the one who was at home, literally felt like I was inside a portal. This is a metaphysical, transcendental, spiritual, non-physical experience. We found out we were pregnant with our third because my oldest son walked up to us and said, "Mom, you're pregnant."
If I was able to have babies, I'd probably have a free birth because there's a real power in this. We were born free. We put shackles on throughout our life in these various ways, in the mind, in the body, and through licensure, through outsourcing our power.
Okay, Mr. Nathan Riley, Dr. Nathan Riley, I'm sorry, Dr. Nathan Riley.
Yeah. Thanks. I was expecting Nathan, but that's fine. Yeah. I worked hard for that doctor, man. I guess I should. People are like, you should go with doctor.
You know, Dr. Cowan, Dr. Tom Cowan, anytime you call him Dr. Cowan, he's like,
Yeah.
Just call me Tom. You don't call your plumber Joe, do you?
Yeah, Plumber Joe.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm still like a regular guy. I have kids. Yeah.
No, but
my wife didn't marry Dr. Riley.
Right.
Yeah.
She married
Yeah.
Nathan Riley, the guy. Yeah. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more. You're talking a little bit off camera, but I'm excited to be forming this relationship with you, man, because just from what I've gathered so far, my experience of you is awesome. And I'm super stoked for this interview. You sent some extensive notes that you have in your hand there.
Yeah, we got, this is like thick, high quality paper too.
It is.
Yeah, we
It's
got some
high
stuff to get into.
Exactly. I'm stoked, man. So you said that you wanted to share how you met Dr. Stu, who I just interviewed last episode. I don't know where it'll shake out in terms of the episode release dates, but Dr. Stu Fishbein, who I interviewed just the other day, and I know you know him really well. You actually trained under him with respect to breech and delivering breech and twin. So I'd just love for you to share how you met Dr. Stu in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's nice to bridge these little, like how do all these people kind of fit in?
Did you use breech there intentionally, by the way?
No. How clever of me. I think it's nice. Like, you and I have been riffing on like, do you know this person? And oh, they know each other this way. And then we made this connection. The medical community is largely that. It is kind of an ongoing networking situation in order to get the training you need to do whatever you need to do. And of course, there's a lot of merit. There's a lot of tests and all that. But when I was in residency, which was in Los Angeles at Kaiser Permanente, most people know what Kaiser is. It's the largest HMO in the country. It is a highly profitable, not-for-profit, highly profitable hospital system. I got great training there. And there was a funny thing that kind of occurred to me. There are certain people who come in who were not permitted to have a vaginal birth. Namely, if you've got a couple babies in there, you could try vaginal birth, but that's going to be like only if there's certain conditions met. If a baby's butt down, you're almost certainly going to be coerced into having a C-section. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because around the 37-week mark, which is term, there's about a 3 to 4% chance that your baby's going to be butt down. And the big question is, well, why can't babies come out butt first? And I'm sure Dr. Stu got into this, but that was a question that I couldn't really get answered because that's just how we do it. And you know enough about me to know that if somebody says, well, that's just how we do it, well, let's go a little deeper. And when you go back into, the annals of medicine, all the journals and all of that, there was a time when it switched. We stopped really teaching residents. And I was after that mark. It was around 2000, the term breech trial. I won't get into the details, but during a lunchtime talk, so in our training, we're not going to see breeches, right? But then we have a lunchtime talk, which is like every week on Thursday at noon, we're going to have a guest speaker. We're going to do journal club, do whatever. And it just so happens we're going to have a film that's shown, and then we're going to have a discussion with a person who's featured in the film. And that person was Dr. Stu Fishbein. The film was called Heads Up, the disappearance of vaginal breech, something like that. And it was really all about this need for us to address this thing where women are not given the option to have a baby butt first vaginally. And Stu was there because he was featured in the film, and he was there to ask questions. And so he's in the film and I'm seeing this guy sitting there. I've got a couple of my, there were attendings. There's an MFM, Emiliana Chavira's across away from me. There's some of the certified nurse midwives next to me. And then a lot of our faculty and residents are there. And people kind of have their arms crossed. I think people are open to it, but I was like excited by this. I was like, so people do have babies butt first. What's the deal with that? Like, why aren't we being taught that? And it's like, well, frankly, a lot of the attendings weren't trained to do that either. Like they weren't it wasn't a part of their skill set. So I reached out to Dr. Stu after the fact and he was like, well, if you're really interested, why don't you come to some births with me? So it wasn't really that Stu taught me breech. That was like the consequence of having gotten to know him. What was really interesting is I got to see a home birth with Dr. Stu in a home of a woman who said, it's okay if a trainee comes. And when we walk in, this is not the story you asked for, but when we walked in, I was like trying to get my gloves and all my gear ready. And he was like, hang on, there's nothing for you to do right now. There's a woman having a baby. Why don't we go and sit on the couch and we'll wait? And there's a midwife who's going to go in and check in and maybe do an exam, but we don't do a lot of exams in the home unless there's a reason to. You just let the whole thing unfold. It's like, and I was like, all right. He's like, this is the art of doing nothing, which is a very active process when you're trained to use your hands to fix problems, right? So we sat on the couch. I think he was probably playing Candy Crush, it's like, what are we doing? We're in this beautiful house. And sure enough, a baby comes out and the sun comes up and they make the family smoothies in their bed and their other kids are there. And I was like, what is this? This is a very, very new experience. And I always tell Stu and his podcast co-host, Bliss Young, who's a dear friend of mine, I remind them, because she was at that birth, that was the moment in time when I realized I can't get out. I need to stay in because you guys have given me, it's not courage. It was nothing like that. It was, you've breathed a new sort of idea, almost a remembering as to how important this work is. And if anybody out there hasn't been to a home birth and you've only seen hospital births, when you go to a home birth, which you have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our most recent was a home birth.
Yeah. It is a completely different experience that is so fulfilling. It is so, you feel so whole afterwards. And my wife saw life come back into me. And I have the utmost gratitude and reverence for Stu Fishbein and Bliss and Julie Anderson, who's another midwife who was involved, and for that family for letting me come into their home, take my shoes off and just wait and be present. Because that absolutely changed everything. And it led to almost everything that we're going to be talking about today. So Dr. Stu, if you're listening, I love you, brother. I love you. And I will always hold you, in a place of like reverence on my altar. So thank you for also interviewing Dr. Stu, because while he's doing this work still, and he's still so sharp and so witty and so just warm to be around, I want people to appreciate just how impactful that man has been in this space. So that is me giving all of the credit to one of my heroes and mentors.
Amen, man. Amen. Were you holistically minded prior to that at all?
Well, what do you mean by holistic?
Leaning more towards any sort of natural medicine or questioning anything related to allopathy.
Well, yeah. I was actually kind of like a curmudgeon-y med student. I was a curmudgeon-y college student as well. Even when I was little, my mom, I actually interviewed her on my own podcast.
Your mom?
And yeah, and she was like a whistleblower and like all that type of stuff when she was a nurse and then administrator. But she tells that, she's like, you were always getting in trouble, but not because you were doing anything wrong, because you were like kind of annoying. You were asking questions and you were just so curious. But because you were so curious, you got to be really, really good at everything you ever did. And that's not me saying I'm good. I'm saying my mother saw me as like, he's better at reading because he's curious about what's in that book, or he's curious about, he wants to build that robot. He's going to go and learn how to read the manual or learn how to use this new tool, whatever. And so in the process of all of those years of schooling, I was a thorn in people's side, but they also recognized that I was going to go somewhere. And fast forward all the way up through med school, I had already been reading like nutrition labels. I was an Ironman distance triathlete at the start of med school. And that requires you to like know your body, to exercise, to lift weights, to kind of start figuring out how can I do this better. So food was important, exercise was important, sleep still wasn't important because it's a waste of my time, right? So to say that I was privy to certain concepts was true, but I think that until you're really in it, it's really hard to see, outside of the fishbowl when you're immersed in it. And it's not until you realize that you're actually maybe doing harm by getting in the way of nature more often than not, that you start to really
first
question.
Home birth, you'd say, or started to hit you then?
I had already been carrying around papers in residency. I had a briefcase like this big with all these papers that helped to justify my unwillingness to intervene in childbirth. But then I probably started looking at it, and then the home birth thing, I was like, we're doing this wrong. The less I do, the better outcomes we have. So much so that I wasn't doing that many C-sections toward the end of my training, and the attendings were like, you're not doing enough C-sections because you have to get so many. Yeah. And so and we do so many C-sections, that's not an issue, but it was more like, let's experiment. It's like the ultimate thing is like, don't read about it in a book, like go and try it out. And the way it turns out is what Dr. Stu had said, the art of doing nothing is a very active process. You're watching and you're waiting and you're saving those golden fingers and all those tools for when you absolutely need it. And if you have enough patience, it's sort of like hold the line, hold the line, hold the line, then you can be very effective when you do it without doing unnecessary harm by acting a little bit prematurely. So the home birth really solidified it. I was like, if this is what birth can feel like, this should be the way that most babies come into the world, maybe 85%. And then we'll leave the other 15% to the surgeons and the pathologists, right? The white coats, which is what I was trained to do. So, and then I've come leaps and bounds since then. I'm not like most OBGYNs. Even Dr. Stu, we're very, very different.
Yeah, I don't know many OBGYNs or allopathic allopathic doctors for that matter, who are reading Steiner and things like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, Steiner also leads you down interesting paths around like the development of the soul. Like most people don't know what a soul, like how would you define a soul? It's an abstract concept. Steiner was very, very clear. And then from that, you can also take away what the field of pre and perinatal psychology has unveiled, which is that even the way a baby is conceived, like if you inject the sperm into the egg and then implant the egg, which is called intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and then implant the egg, which is a typical IVF procedure, into the uterus, the perinatal psychologists and prenatal psychologists, after the fact, observe that those kids, they give up more easily on projects. They have lower self-esteem, because they didn't have to travel all the way down the fallopian tube, implant into the uterus. So that is a field that sounds so abstract, but they're all keen on this notion that there is a reason that babies are supposed to come into the world vaginally. It won't always happen. And we're not saying we shouldn't sometimes do C-sections, or we shouldn't sometimes do assisted reproductive, technologies like IVF or whatever. But when we do that, we have to realize that is bypassing certain parts of the process that will lead to some potentially long-term detriment to the child. And so, from allopathy to Steiner, which is a huge spiritual sort of growth in and of itself, going back into birth, but through the lens of pre and perinatal psychology, and recognizing that you, Alec, and your partner and your children, the way that we care for you from start to finish, even the way that you're having sex when this child is conceived, matters as to the well-being and how this child ultimately integrates into the family and the community. So where do we go from there?
Where do we go? Well, I like I liked all the notes that you put, but starting with mythology and ritual, why did you want to start there?
I did because, a lot of people think of Joseph Campbell immediately, right? It's where like the hero's journey. He was like the one that kind of spelled that out, and all the Star Wars films, everybody can relate to the hero's journey. He actually said, and I think it's The Power of Myth, he was like, we don't have any ritual anymore. But I would argue the opposite. I actually think most of what we're doing, especially as it pertains to childbirth, is ritualistic in the sense that it is reinforcing myths that are not really in service to us. The big myth here, of course, is that childbirth is naturally dangerous. And if you don't have a surgeon there at any moment, then everything will, all hell breaks loose. And that's just not true. Pregnancy is not inherently a disease. Birth is not inherently a medical procedure. But the rituals, the way that we treat women in childbirth and their partners and the children afterwards is playing out and reinforcing these myths that are not in service to actually what we want to see. And so if we can reimagine what ritual actually is, and it starts with the unnecessary vaginal exam or the hep lock or the counseling around your baby could die, and therefore you don't know what to do because you're in the throes of labor and you just agree to whatever the doctor wants to do. All of those little rituals lead up to the playing out of a story that is an old story. And that's really what my whole career is about, shifting from births only being in hospitals to births being back in the hands of midwives for most women, under most circumstances, generally in the home environment.
You took this at a different angle in this notes that I have here, talking about John Taylor Gatto and education.
Yeah.
as, I guess, the pre-context to where we went wrong with birth. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
I'm just going to follow your outline, dude, because it was epic.
No, thanks. Like, I mean, I appreciate that.
I texted you before you got here. I'm like, if we're going to follow this outline for the episode, then this episode's going to be epic. So let's just go ahead and do that.
Let me also take a moment just to acknowledge your audience. Like, like you, I don't have all the answers. Like, a part of the really, really rich, like this experience of being alive, this iteration of whoever I am, is that I have the faculties, the capacities, and the luxury to say, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure about that. And if I come to a conclusion that, oh, actually that was true, great. If it wasn't, then let's go further. Let's go further until we hit another dead end. And so everything that we're going to talk about today, I am not saying like I am an expert in childbirth. How could I be an expert? I have never had a baby. But I'm asking a lot of questions. And I think one thing, going back to the education conversation, is that kids are being let down through a compulsory educational program, which we'll discuss. But the biggest failure is that we're making them confused, which gets to the John Gatto quote. And we're not teaching people how to ask good questions. So can you remember like the best teacher you ever had?
Yes.
What was something you took away from them? Why were they such a good teacher?
Because they instilled critical thought. And that was the best class I ever had in college by far. Like I did best in that class. I think I finished second amongst my entire West Point class in that specific class on the final because I was so interested in it. And it happened to be American politics. That was the class.
But you were engaged.
Dude, I was so engaged.
They drew the Sophia, the wisdom from within, and it allowed you to play around with who it is that you are and how this relates to the world.
Yeah.
And that goes beyond like, they should teach how to write checks and balance a checkbook in school. Sure, like that's practical advice, but a good teacher actually sees that there's some beautiful, unique genius in Alec. And how can we nurture Alec in order for that to be expressed in the world? Otherwise, like, hey, if everybody just knows the same thing, we have a really nice group of factory workers someday who aren't going to ask questions. They're not critical thinkers. And so when people start to consider what is it that you learned in school, I want you to really be clear. Like, could you have learned that had you found a mentor who just decided to teach you that, right? Like you were a handball player, right? Yep. If I wanted to like learn the rules of handball, I could read about it in a book. Great. And then take a test on it. And like, I guess I understand how to play handball now. Or you and I could just go and beat around there and you could say, try doing it this way, try doing it that way. And if I was passionate enough and interested and I had the time, I wasn't stuck in school for 8 hours a day, I could learn whatever I wanted. Right. That is not true for every child. Some children may need this and may need that. But I would even challenge the notion that we need to teach kids to read at 3 or 4. That kid, when they want to learn how that like story goes. What's the next book in my kids are in this Dragon Master series. I don't know if you know about it, but it's awesome. It's like, it's childish, but there's all these characters. It's like elementary Lord of the Rings sort of. And my 5, soon to be 6-year-old Penny, she will want to read more books. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to read, every night to you anymore. I would never do that. But if she wanted to learn how to read, she was like, well, can you teach me how to read? She's already trying to sound it out because she's so into books. Maybe my 4-year-old Everly, maybe she won't be as into books. But the point here is that when John Gatto, who was in 1991, he was elected the New York, State Teacher of the Year or whatever. He gets up on stage in front of all these people, all of his like peers and whatever. And he's like, thank you for the award, but I just want you to like recognize that my role has never actually been to teach English. I teach school. And the first lesson is confusion and disconnection, which if you think back to even what happened during the COVID moment, confusion and disconnection is what was happening. So how does this relate to medicine? Well, Ivan Illich is another really great, actually Tom Cowan, who you've interviewed, he speaks a lot about Ivan Illich. And Ivan Illich was a theologian, Austrian, I believe. And he ended up, Austrian. He ended up in Central America doing quite a bit of work. He actually wrote a very famous essay called To Hell with Good Intentions. And he's basically saying in the School of the Americas, the influence from the United States to help educate the Latin American people, it's not wanted. What you're trying to do is turn them into the same thing you have in the United States. And actually, that's not in service to us. So good intentions, but to hell with them, right? And so what he actually would argue is, and he has a great book called Deschooling Society, which is not an easy read, but it's short. And he argues that everything that a person will need to learn in life could be learned in some other way than compulsory education. You're probably very familiar with this. But the reason that this applies to medicine is that physicians go through more school than anybody, more than PhDs, more than nurses, more than nurse practitioners, more than even lawyers. And so whenever something like COVID or anything happens, if you get an MD up there to put their credentials behind some agenda point, it matters because the population of people that are being, I don't want to say manipulated, but sometimes that's true, that they're being persuaded by whatever's in the headlines and whatnot, they have also been conditioned to believe that the more years of school you go to, the more valuable you are. So what compulsory education, meaning, Alec, you have to go to school, otherwise mom and dad are going to go to jail. And you have to learn the curriculum in your school district. That's the only way to do it. Homeschool, you have to still adopt the curriculum. You know, there's very few programs, Waldorf is probably the one exception where they're like, there's no curriculum. Yeah. This child will become whoever they're going to be, and we're going to give them the tools and see how they're developing and help craft them into that unique genius that was Alec, that we beat out of because you needed to pass this test to move on to the next level. Mm-hmm. And for those kids who don't make it through 12th grade or don't make it through college or don't make it through med school or whatever comes after that, residency, fellowship, it just keeps going. They're lower caste and they don't necessarily have the great job opportunities. They're not seen as valuable. And so when people are like, hey, this journal article or that journal article, like we can get into the silliness of peer-reviewed literature, later. But when people are wondering, how did that study, the ARRIVE trial is probably one that Dr. Stu talked about, how did that study change our practice so much? Because it had 15 or so authors, all with at least an MD, some with a PhD, some with an MPH. And that matters in our world. So can you learn to be a neurosurgeon without going to school? No, we probably do need a really clear curriculum if you're going to be operating on somebody's brain. Do we need licensure for medicine? Maybe, because at least it says that you passed some sort of testing.
Some sort of standard.
Yeah, but does everybody want to become a doctor? No. Some people actually are artists. And they're creatives and they want to make music. And some kids, maybe their way of expressing their own unique genius is not going to be expressed through written or let's say written language. Maybe those kids aren't going to learn to read as quickly. That's okay. And maybe some of those kids will need help. The point here is that because we have compelled everybody to do it this way, you now fall in line and we're now teaching compliance, confusion, and disconnection. And so whenever a doctor, Tony Fauci, whoever, stands up in there, it actually does matter. There's a reason that it matters, and it's because you were conditioned to believe that because he has more school than you, he's more valuable. And his opinion matters more. One last thing I guess I'll say about that is because physicians are working in life and death, they're ultimately now this cult of medicine that people like Kelly Brogan use, those terms, they are in service to reality because the biggest questions, we used to go to the priests and pastors for that. Now we go to the physicians, this cult of medicine, the new priests in white coats, because they have the answers to the big questions about life, death, and birth. And so I also have my other board specialty is in hospice and palliative medicine. So I've sat with a lot of death and birth. And that is a lot of power to wield because I'm the one now with the secret answer, the answer to the big secret. And you've been conditioned from maybe age 6 to go and find a teacher to educate you on some particular thing as opposed to being able to go and find out the information for yourself. And I know you get knocked around a lot online, and I'm so proud of you. And I feel like it's not even a lot of courage. It's just you knowing who you are. Just because you don't have an MD doesn't mean you can't go and look up the primary source. And if you need help, you just call me or call one of your doctor friends, right?
Sometimes we'll help you figure out what that is. The study, so I'll find someone who has.
Let me know. I can get past those things. So it has created a space in which it doesn't matter how much you read, you don't have an MD. And I could be an MD and I haven't read anything for 10 years and I'm still going to have an opinion that's heavier than yours. And that's why it's so hard to change maternity care.
It's interesting too, little anecdote on that. There's been several times where someone has decided not to have me at an event because they have someone else speaking on whatever topic they wanted me to speak on, which was typically virology, that happens to have credentials after their name. And simply because that individual had credentials after their name, they figured that it would be more appropriate to include them than me.
Yeah. Which
I've gotten over it now. And luckily I've, whatever this means, made a name for myself enough to have some weight in some of these conversations. And again, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm just asking the right questions, I believe. Asking questions that, other people have never thought of to ask and might point to some deeper lack of evidence in certain areas. But the point is that to your point, it is true. It is very true that the MD holds a lot of weight, maybe the most weight amongst society.
Right. And you don't have to go for residency training after you get your MD. We have a phrase, it's P equals MD. Pass equals MD. So you could be the worst student in your medical class. And honestly, I may have been. I don't really know where my standing was, but I was asking so many questions that my faculty, the educators couldn't answer, that I started kind of brushing it aside. It was like, well, I'm going to have to go and read this stuff on my own. And that's where the extracurricular studying comes in, where you're reading stuff that's not a part of your curriculum. It's still going to answer those questions. And since we're talking about med school, just for a moment, pharmaceutical companies finance a lot of our medical education. So why would we be teaching about natural herbs and whatever, diet and all this other cool stuff that we do to try to keep ourselves healthy and our skin clear and our teeth looking nice? There's a pill for that, And we'll get into the alternative health movement, but they've fallen into the same traps, It's no better. It's worse, actually. Yeah. So I'm curious, how did it feel for you? How does it feel for you when somebody says, well, we'd rather have this person and not you because they're an MD? You can be honest with you. I'm just really curious.
I'm happy.
You're a very smart man.
So it used to offend me quite a bit. Now it happens less and less, but I'd imagine if it were to happen now, I would simply respond to them by saying, like, aren't you reinforcing the very same paradigm that you claim to be opposing? That's it.
Well, now we have a way of linking all of that. That's why I think some of these principles actually really, really matter. People don't realize how silly it is to have an MD up there just because they're an MD. It's like, a doctor of neurosurgery making some sort of commentary on an OBGYN's practice, which happens. And because neurosurgeons are paid more and they went through more school, suddenly they're an expert in obstetrics. Like, what are you, insane? like, how does that make any sense? So, it's probably a good opportunity to also mention, and we'll get into like peer-reviewed literature, in a little bit, but the clinical experience of the practitioner is just as valuable as whatever the peer-reviewed literature says, and a client's history. So if Alec, you say, I have a really, really bad allergy, anaphylactic allergy to bananas, but a study comes out in the New England Journal that says, if you eat a banana a day, without a doubt, we have proven that eating a banana a day will get you to 100 years old. But you've got an anaphylactoid reaction, let's say, to bananas, just smelling them in the room, then that's not going to apply to you. So when we look at peer-reviewed literature, we have to say, is this even applicable to Alec? The answer is no. So peer-reviewed literature isn't helpful. So if evidence is equitable entirely, like synonymously with peer-reviewed literature, we're missing a big opportunity there, which is your story. And then a clinician's experience is also very valuable. And if you've been treating this certain way and didn't know that there was another way to do it, and then somebody says, that way doesn't work, I've done that for 20 years and it's been just fine. What are we talking about? It doesn't work.
This may be jumping around a little bit.
Yeah, please.
I can't help myself. This is one of the big problems in the quote unquote alternative health space is protocols.
Let's talk about
that don't take account for the individual,
Yeah. So the reason I brought that up is that the pendulum has swung. I think people see the pendulum as swinging. Post-COVID, maybe. I don't know. COVID was such a big deal that it's easy to relate to that. It's like the dropping of a bomb on Hiroshima or something, right? Like, I'm sorry for making that comparison, but it's one of those points that at our parents' generation, that was like a point in time, or maybe our grandparents or whatever.
9/11, another one.
Yeah, it's like something that is you remember exactly what that was about. You remember how it felt inside your body. So before that, people were all upset with pharmaceutical companies. There was like this shift, and then COVID happened and like suddenly everybody was cool with pharmaceutical companies. And then a big cohort of people started swinging over here and they pushed back on everything in allopathy, which is Western medicine, so to speak. And the problem is they actually were committing the same fallacies in their logic, in their rhetoric that the allopaths were making. And so I was standing there even during COVID. I was like, you guys are both missing the big picture here. Not about COVID, but about like if we're going to get healthy, it's not going to be a prescriptive means whereby we find a couple little spots on your body that all seem to fit a pattern, which we call a syndrome or a disease. And then we say, well, here's the answer. Instead of using the, pharmaceutical A, use this shit in a bottle or whatever that somebody, got from somewhere on Amazon. And it's now our new savior. I'm not saying all supplements are bad, but that way of thinking about the human being is steeped in materialism. So materialism is not just what the Kardashians exhibit when they're buying extra cars or whatever. Like that's one way to use that word. This also kind of gets back into the Steiner kind of way of raising children. I also believe that like, people are really, really out to get doctors nowadays. And I actually don't think doctors are necessarily the problem. I think the source of this problem goes all the way back to like Rene Descartes, Francis Bacon, like 16th century philosophers who actually needed physicians to have the ability to dissect into bodies. It wasn't them doing it for the physicians, but as a consequence of them arguing that the soul and the spirit were separate from the physical, that now we can operate on this body without worrying about disturbing this person's posthumous relationship to the universe or cosmos or whatever. And so as a consequence, we could dissect bodies, the advancement of medicine and this and that, but the pendulum hasn't reconstituted somewhere in the middle. And so we just see this like meat suit, this sort of components organized into what we call Alex Zek. And then there's a whole bunch of chemical reactions. And that's it. That's Alex Zek. And of course that's silly to people. That is materialism. Like that's it. And so I've listed like in our notes here, a number of tenets that just came to me last night. And it kind of starts with like doctors just being dehumanized in general. Like you don't take potty breaks, you don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't have sex, you don't do anything. You're now a robot operating within a very, very sophisticated medical system. So forget about your spiritual precepts or percepts about the world or about birth in my case. Just do your job, operate, and get them out of the door. Healthy mom, healthy baby, right? Which really translates to the baby and mom are not dead after this whole thing. It's a pretty low bar to set. As I've mentioned, birth is treated as a medical procedure. We do everything in our power to avoid death. Even when you die, we're going to embalm you, put your favorite clothes and jewelry on you, put you in in a lead-lined casket in a concrete tomb 6 feet below the ground, because heaven forbid Alex Zek be reconstituted into the matter that is the substance of the universe. Right? So living now is just equitable to not dying. And we have this whole anti-aging business. And sure, some of those things might be helpful occasionally here and there, but the idea that you're getting older is a privilege. And we don't see it that way any longer because we're so steeped in materialism.
Well, speaking to that real quick, alternative medicine, quote unquote, in its most extreme form looks like biohacking in the form of Brian Johnson, whose whole shtick is don't die.
Right.
Literally, that's his whole shtick.
Right.
Using a lot of these synthetic substances and therapeutics, a sort of anti-nature approach that is a quasi-alternative, in air quotes, approach to health.
Yeah, and that is actually far more materialistic even than the surgeons and everything else. It's as if we're going to upload Alex Zek to a hard drive and Alex is going to be here with me forever in my pocket. Right. Like it can't work like that. And what Steiner and Rudy Verspor and Edmund Knighton, these types of really, really smart people would say to that is that you can't evolve without a physical body. This actually is the most spiritual gift you've been granted. Like this is the means by which you experience the world, which is the impetus for spiritual development. So this notion that, going back to like the tenets of materialism, I mentioned pre and perinatal psychology, which actually argues that the way that babies come into the world matters. Inducing a labor matters. The way that babies are conceived matters. All of that matters. Doesn't mean it leads to irreparable damage. It means that there is something that can happen as a consequence, and we as a society need to recognize. If we're about 40% C-section rate in our country, if it gets to 100, that is a dystopia. That's it. Like that cannot happen. In fact, we should be peeling those numbers back because this really matters. We have this palliation of everything in allopathic medicine. The heart is not a pump. We have gender politics in medicine. Like everything is steeped in this notion that like, I'm just the sum of all of these parts. And that's not enough for me. So the alternative, and I won't even get into more. We've talked about assisted reproductive technologies, even physiologic birth, which we can talk about in a second. I don't like the term physiology.
Yeah, I want to hear about
that. We'll get into that. But so the people that are speaking so harshly about allopathic medicine have committed the same problems. Everything is about looking better, feeling better, get abs at all costs. Diet is just like count the macros in food. There is more to a carrot than the constituent parts. The carotenoids and the sugar and the cellulose or whatever else. Even exercise is soulless. This is something Edmund had taught me recently because he's a yogi. He's a very spiritual yogi. He's like, it's just about getting like thin and jacked. You're just grinding it in the gym all day. And I love the gym. I mean, I really, really love the feeling of exercise, but it's soulless versus dancing where you're actually feeling something. It's not just about getting bigger and stronger. It's even sounds material. It's like reducing yourself down to a rock hard immovable object, right? And we are not meant to be immovable objects. We're actually meant to be flowing and fiery and air and watery and some material substance. So I would argue that, supplements are almost entirely a joke. I think vitamins, if it says vitamin on the bottle, it's probably not real. I don't want to get into that one because that's a bigger conversation.
That deserves a whole episode.
Yeah, that's a big one. But I actually don't, vitamin C that you get in liposomal vitamin C, they're not going to an orange and pulling vitamin C out. They're making it in a lab, period. And that's basically a pharmaceutical that's just not regulated.
Yeah, and to claim that represents the same substance that is inside a wholly intact fruit is absurd.
Yeah, right. Is it the citrus that's fixed the scurvy or was it vitamin C?
Right.
I mean, I'm just saying these things to provoke a little bit of curiosity in people.
On that note, can I say this just for my audience real quick?
Yeah.
I just want to make this clear. I'll use this episode to do it. That there are oftentimes moments and episodes where I'm interviewing someone and they say something that I don't agree with. And I'm not going to interject in every single instance and say, well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Are you sure about that? It's just not appropriate. I just wanted to share that from my audience because I get some flack for that sometimes. We're like, Alec, why didn't you challenge him on him saying vitamin C? And I'm just like, there's a time and a place.
Well, I beat you to it.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that I'm not certain that there's even a real thing as vitamins.
Right.
So that's very confronting to say to people.
It is.
So almost anything can be questioned. And the alternative health people have questioned it, but they're still asking the wrong questions. Yeah. They're going about it, I think, a wrong way. And we can get into the hormone replacement therapy and TRT and all this stuff that's just super fun. Functional medicine is all the rage. All that means is I take a sample of blood out of you, I run a bunch of tests on it, cost you a lot of money, and then I give you a bunch of junk in bottles that is supposed to, replete you of those things. Yeah. But that's as silly as me taking a piece of bark off of a dead tree and saying, here's what the life of the tree was like. There's no biographical sketch there or a sample from a stream and a month later trying to treat the stream based on that water sample. It's detached from its living source. So you can't do that. That's not how medicine should work. And Victor Schauberg, I'm sure you're familiar with all that work. What a genius from just directly observing waterways, and we don't have to get into the water thing. My point is that it is okay for you to be a little bit more curious than the textbooks and this talking heads and whatnot have allowed you to, or your teachers or your whoever. There are so many unanswered questions.
Do you think that alternative medicine is coming from the wrong premise, speaking in a general, very broad sense, because it's still rooted in materialism? Is that your main
Yeah, it's
issue?
Still asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
So people, the reason I asked you about holistic is, what do you mean by holistic?
Right.
Holistic to me is you are more than the sum of your parts.
Mind, body, spirit.
Yeah, there is far more going on here in my little girls than just keep them fed, wipe their butts, and feed them food. They are going through a spiritual upgrade almost every moment of every day. And to not honor that is actually to not be a good parent.
Amen.
Because you're not here to have an accessory who is the championship basketball player. I know you play basketball. I'm not picking on that. I mean,
no.
It's not your job to make that kid into the thing that you want them to be. It's to see what is this kid going to be and what can I learn from them?
Yeah. What wants to express out of them authentically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of not asking the right questions, which I actually do think comes from the compulsory education system. We're not really teaching kids to ask questions. You had that one class. You had a teacher who rewarded you and saw you as a person who can ask good questions if given the right attention. So the alternative health movement, I think, is a step in the right direction because it's more natural, which is one way that people think holistic. But when people come to me, my practice is called Beloved Holistics. They expect I'm going to be doing functional labs and popping you filled with supplements. And yes, there are times when that works for certain things for a short period of time. But it is not the end all be all. Your labs can only tell you what happened at that moment that the blood work was collected, if anything at all. And so we use that as a tool. But whenever people throw everything into one basket, I think they start to lose the plot of the story.
So you brought up the overuse of the word physiology, or why you don't like physiology as it applies to birth. And I would imagine that also just applies to your take on biology and medicine as a whole. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the reason I wrote these notes out for us is because there's a story that we're telling here, which is how do we get from a place where, babies are tended to by midwives. They're coming out through the vagina. Sometimes babies die. There's a time and place for grieving and mourning that part of our own mortality. And And most of the people that are trying to kind of like bring all of these topics together, they like to say doctors don't know physiologic birth. They don't get to see physiologic birth. I know what they mean, Alec. You know, what's your wife's name again? Kylie. You and Kylie had a home birth. Yeah. That was a physiologic birth for sure. We got to see what happens when we take all of the stuff, unnecessary stuff out of the way and let nature unfold. That's what people mean by physiologic birth. But here's the problem with physiology. If you describe birth as a physiologic process, you have fallen back into the trap of materialism. A car also has physiology. It's like literally the study of how things naturally work between like all the physics of fluid mechanics and whatever, right? There is physiology in the world. A plant has physiology. Everything has physiology. Yes, it's an explanation of how things are naturally operating in the world. The problem with describing that as in birth is, of course, goes back to the pre and perinatal psychology. And for those who aren't familiar with that field, I would look up Thomas Verney, Klaus Capelli, Stan Grof. Those are the Bobby Chamberlain, I think, is the other one. These are like the founding figures who started thinking about what does a baby go through in childbirth? And some people can remember their birth experience. That would be a wild thing to remember. And Stan Grof even describes that as the perinatal matrices theory of childbirth, whereby the 4 stages, you're in this warm, loving, amniotic universe, and then after a couple of stages, you're now being expelled into this alien world. Like how traumatic for the soul that's coming into the world. But then maybe there's also sentience and consciousness, within this sort of baby's makeup even before they're born. Like maybe they have memories that even precede that when they were in the Petri dish during the IVF procedure. Who knows? So I want people to be curious about that field and explore it. I just interviewed Tom Burney on my podcast in case anybody's curious. But in order to understand why this physiology thing, like I think it's problematic in the way that people are using it is, I want to use the example of the 7 cardinal movements: engagement, descent, internal rotation, extension, external rotation, and expulsion. These are 7 movements that the baby presumably goes through every single time they go through the pelvis. And then people will say, the physiology of childbirth, here are the cardinal movements. This is how a baby comes through the pelvis. The problem with that is, in the way that physiology is reflective of a materialistic, reductive way of viewing childbirth, these cardinal movements are steeped in this notion that a baby has there's mechanics to how this happens. And the reason I started questioning this is that most of the time a baby comes out head first. Most of the time the back of the baby's head is adjacent to the woman's pubic bone, the pubic symphysis. But sometimes babies come out with their eyes looking up at the ceiling if a woman's on their back, or the head sideways, or the head kind of asynclitic, as we call it. Sometimes their feet first, sometimes their butt first. So when you say that the 7 cardinal movements of labor happen, like how often? Like what are we talking about here? There's a reason that we have to push back on this term, because if we understand the mechanics of it, then we can find some technology in order to interfere with that pattern. We'll talk about oxytocin in a second, but just to kind of finish up on this and to give people permission to like lean in. This is the thing that like Tom Cowan and I do, and that you actually do with virology and whatnot. If it doesn't sound right, let's just go a little deeper and see, why does this not sound right to me? Well, I found the 7 cardinal movements of labor because I was like, how do we even know? How can you know that the baby's going through this? Like, well, you could put them in imaging or whatever. I found this described as early as 1897 in a textbook written by a man, by the way, called the Manual of Midwifery. Like a really, really old midwifery text, chapter 12, in case anybody wants to go onto like whatever those archive.org or whatever. And that was the first place. It went all the way back. Well, X-ray. And so when I say, hey, how could we know that these 7 things happen? Well, they X-rayed them. Well, X-ray was developed in 1895. The book was written in 1897. Do you think that we were X-raying all these women enough times with that early, high intense radiation? Do you think we were actually doing that 2 years after X-ray was developed? Probably not. And so I use this as an example in order for people to appreciate that understanding physiologic childbirth is actually not the answer. And if anybody's a physiologist, it's a physician. And it's knowing physiology that has allowed us to hijack every element of childbirth. So I don't know. I mean, I had mentioned the heart, being a pump here, but oxytocin is used frequently in childbirth, after birth to prevent bleeding, during birth to speed labor up, intensify contractions.
Oxytocin specifically, not Pitocin?
Well, Pitocin is the synthetic version.
Yes, but they're not the same thing.
They are not the same thing. And right? By the way, Pitocin is stored in a bag with a preservative that I believe is I want to say it's a formaldehyde derivative. No, it's chloroform.
Oh, chloroform.
So
okay.
Not that the chloroform, everybody worries about that. This is not the same chemical. And so oxytocin is not only a hormone that hits the uterus, it's also a neurotransmitter that leads to all the loving and bonding, and actually is also a mitigator of the stress response, especially in men. But there's a difference between men and women. It's this whole thing. And so once we discovered there's this chemical that hits these receptors, we can now develop a chemical substitute for this hormone / neurotransmitter. And now we've hijacked another element of the childbirth process. So to say that physicians or that people in the system don't know physiologic birth is ridiculous. Of course they do. They want to know more and more and more so they can develop more and more interventions to, quote, keep moms and babies safe. So I just really think that that's an important illustration for people where you hear this thing, the 7 cardinal movements in labor. Every med student who wants to be an OBGYN has that memorized because day one, they're going to be asked, so hey, intern, what are the 7 cardinal movements of labor? And you can ring it off in your head. Yeah. I don't even really have them memorized anymore because they're not real. It's just not real. It's like anything else that you question.
It reifies a strictly physical paradigm is what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And there's a dogma to that too.
Most of you are already aware that our everyday devices are taking a real toll on human biology. Talking about our laptops, our tablets, our phones. Each one of these is hitting you with non-native EMFs, artificial light, excessive blue light, and constant screen flicker. And most of us are feeling the harmful effects whether we realize it or not. But there is a better option. Daylight Computer is actually solving all these problems at the root. And I had an awesome conversation with Tristan Scott from Daylight on episode 202, breaking all this down. Here's a brief clip from the episode.
We have a reflective display technology, similar to a Kindle, which was really the inspiration behind the product overall. It's really intended to be a magic piece of paper. And the reflective technology works just like everything else in nature.
What are some differences between this and a Kindle?
Kindle was the inspiration, but it was limited. It's great for reading, for turn paging, but if you try and do anything else, it's too slow. We wanted to bring a display technology that feels like digital paper, but can do more. It can do email, it can go on the internet, it can go on social media. We created a Kindle on steroids, which now means it's a healthier iPad.
All right, so if you'd like to check out Daylight for yourself, just head to daylightcomputer.com or just head to the show notes and enter code TWF50 at checkout for $50 off your order. And if you're a member of the wayforward.com, just head to the member marketplace and you'll find an even greater member exclusive discount waiting for you there. What comes out for me, having experienced one home birth, but then another that was in a birthing center that was essentially like a master bedroom with a bathtub, and my daughter was born in a bathtub. And then one birth with our oldest in the hospital that was a C-section with the cascade of interventions like Pitocin, epidural, the whole thing. So I've seen all sides of it just with my own children. And maybe I'm more spiritually inclined, if you want to call it that, at this point in my life than I was back then. I don't know. All I can say is this: the birth of my son, my third baby, the one that was at home, literally felt like I was inside a portal. Like it actually felt like it was in a portal. So when I hear the term physiology, especially with the context that you're giving, I see exactly what you're getting at, because this whole time that you've been speaking, I've been ruminating on that. Like, no, this is a metaphysical, transcendental, spiritual, non-physical experience. And it really began in a way that modern materialism cannot explain, in that we found out we were pregnant with our third because my oldest son walked up to us and said, "Mom, you're pregnant." We're like, "What?" Shrugged his shoulders. "You're pregnant." We're like, "How do you know that?" And he was like, "I just know." And he walked away. And then 3 days later, Mr. Period, looking at each other like, "Oh." And then took a test, pregnant. Like, he knew. He just knew. And that sort of speaks to what we're talking about here regarding like the journey of the soul and modern medicine, really modern society, all forms of quote unquote science being so rooted in materialism that they're missing the forest for the trees. They don't even know what the tree is. Like, it's even deeper than that typical analogy. Like, they don't even know what the tree actually is in the first place. And even like speaking to a lot of alternative ways of thinking with respect to the metaphysical phenomena that so many of us recognize to be real, but are trying to figure out what is the cause. A lot of that, unfortunately, goes back to or is referred to as quantum phenomena. But quantum mechanics is rooted in materialism itself as well. This idea that there's these submicroscopic bouncing balls. And
there's like little particles.
Yeah, little particles everywhere. Right. But that's a whole separate conversation.
No, you bring up a really good point though, which is, we could lean into pre and perinatal psychology. We can do all of that. But if you imagine that little baby is coming in through Stan-Grof's matrices, the little baby is coming into the world, and you have this incredible moment with Kylie, and the kids are there, and you have this whole thing. If I then later asked you that question, tell me the story of your birth. If I ever meet Kylie, I'll say, tell me about your birth. And Kylie might say something like, I felt like I was in the astral. I felt like I was burning up and being reconstituted as a woman again. I felt powerful. I felt scared. I felt ecstatic. I felt whatever. None of those things are measurable. But are they important? Well, we don't have a study for that. I know it's important because she told me. And you felt it. And she felt it. She lived that. So what's really, really important about what you're saying is that Kylie's experience actually mattered. But just because we can't measure it doesn't mean it's not valuable. And everything that you have described already should be what we are studying in childbirth. Why was that so powerful for you? Why did it matter to your son that you guys were in love? Why did it matter that you didn't take him out by C-section? Which, by the way, the perinatal psychologists also connect to low self-esteem. They're seeing people with low self-esteem and they're associating it more often than not with, whoa, we removed you from the womb. Doesn't mean some babies shouldn't have a C-section. I'm not saying that. But then this will eventually get us into the conversation around free birth, because all of the stuff that happens before, during, and after that birth acts as long as the mom and baby are alive, that's all that matters. What Kylie won't tell me is, what was my blood pressure? What was my heart rate? What was the baby's oxygen saturations? What was my blood count? Because none of that shit matters. That's the appendix. The real story of the birth is, whoa, what did I just go through? And as long as we continue to advertise childbirth as some, situation in which doomsday is around the corner, people are going to be continued to be afraid because there's some person holding some magic key. The answer to this solution, this transformation of spirit you're about to go through, by convincing you it's a medical procedure, by convincing you that you won't be safe and you won't physically be alive after this if you're not in the hands of a doctor. And that all started in school. So that was a nice little roundabout way of threading all this together.
That was great, man. One of the things related to materialism that you wanted to talk about and give as sort of an example of where the alternative health space is getting it wrong and we're coming from a very materialistic worldview is with respect to the heart. And I know our friend Dr. Cowan talks about this quite a bit. And I've interviewed Dr. Stephen Hussey on it and how the heart is not a pump. But it's cool looking at it from the lens of embryology and birth. So, and you said you had a story to share. Well, it's time in hospice.
It's more like a clinical, just an experience that we have in the hospice and palliative medicine world. So for starters, I don't know if people often understand what like board certification means. After you finish residency, or in my case, fellowship, you then sit for a test. And if you're an OB-GYN, you also do a surgical exam. Well, that requires you to get all this experience and then to sit for a test, and then you get board certification. So my second board certification is in hospice and palliative medicine. I did my fellowship training at UC San Diego, which is a really, really great program for this. And they have a very big interventional cardiology program that we work with at Scripps nearby. And so through that program, I got to meet a lot of people who had heart failure for some reason, especially young people, 30 somethings on opioids for a long time. They end up with left ventricular heart failure. So left-sided heart failure means that blood doesn't exit the left side of the heart out to the rest of the body. It kind of just like sits there and you have a problem. Now we're going to get into, the heart, must be a pump, and therefore the blood's sitting there because the heart can't push it out. That's the old story. But what I was finding is through, seeing how they mostly were men, how they would be worked up and then ultimately recommended to be fitted with what's called a left ventricular assist device. got me on this idea is that the heart is not a pump. And so we'll get into the embryology in a second.
So you hadn't heard about this from someone else before?
No. This is
Wow.
I was just observing this.
Wow.
So what this device is, Alec, is it's a pump. It's literally a propulsion pump. And I open up actually don't know how they put it in. They probably put it in through, I don't know, whatever. They probably have to open your chest up, I'm guessing. But they put it in the left ventricle, right? And the left ventricle is the one that presumably is the biggest, strongest part that has to shove blood all the way up and all the way down and through the capillaries. How that blood gets back to the heart there's a bigger problem for that model. But anywho, when these people were diagnosed and then ultimately fitted with one of these left ventricular assist devices, you would think if the heart is just a simple mechanical pump that we've solved the problem. What's funny about it is if you listen to their heart, they don't have a heartbeat anymore. There's no mechanical anything happening. It's like a pool. It sounds like a pool filter. It's like, so blood is moving around the body, but we haven't fixed any problem because many of those people become suicidal. Many of them no longer want to live, and many of them look like zombies. Now, this is not a judgment on anybody. It was a loss of the living something in them when they walk in the door to be checked on. And I was the palliative care guy, so I would be checking in on what's life at home? How is life with the pump? Doc, I don't know why I did this. This is terrible. And what I think that what they're not saying is this is an uncomfortable device. It didn't keep me alive. You are alive. It did do that. But that actually draws into question, like, what is life to begin with? Because just because you have blood circulating doesn't necessarily mean you're living. And going back to our materialistic, reductive model of human beingness, like life is not just meant to be the avoidance of, or avoidance of death or the prolongation of the dying process. But what I was seeing in these individuals was a lack of vitality. So what is the animating force that makes you look alive and a corpse Alec not alive? Is it that 21 grams that goes with the spirit? Like, I don't know what it is. I'm not saying I have the answers, but this is interesting. We've replaced the basic mechanical function of the heart, if it's a pump, with a pump. And this person's not doing all that great. In fact, they feel like, I'd rather not be here because they have felt like something has slipped. We are keeping them alive. This is true life support. And so this got me thinking about, okay, maybe the heart isn't a pump. Like maybe actually if it doesn't work to replace it with a pump, maybe it's not a pump. And then in that case, like what's the purpose of the heart? And that actually got me down a long path that led me back to some really cool people. I mentioned here Torrance Guasp, who's a Spanish cardiologist, and Francisco Torrance Guasp. And his work was introduced to me again by Tom Cowan. I have a lot to thank Tom Cowan for. He really did open my eyes up to a lot of really interesting concepts. But
have you had him on your show?
No, I haven't. I think we had been chatting about it, and I just never pursued it. One of those things. And also, if you haven't read his books, it's so easy. Just go. The book is so easy to read, and any of his books. And so it's I've just given his books out for years. But through him, I found this Torrance Guasp, Francisco Torrance Guasp, who actually had these videos where he was taking these hearts, boiling them, and then peeling them out as one coil of tissue. So it wasn't we have this massive tissue, and then suddenly now there's chambers that are formed by these septums coming into place. It was, it's an extravagation or whatever you want to call it of the early circulatory system that becomes thickened and then curls itself in a vortex around a central point. And it's really interesting that there's 3 chakras above and 3 chakras below the heart. What is this?
I think about that all the time.
It's beautiful. Right. It's poetic even, And so I'm an OBGYN. What do we do when a person comes in with a positive pregnancy test? We pop an ultrasound on your belly and we look for a fetal heartbeat. But there is no fetal heartbeat because you could be at 4 weeks, you could be in the clinic with a baby in your belly, and I can detect cardiac activity, but the heart itself doesn't form until around 7 to 8 weeks. So there is something happening in there, and there is blood circulating, but we don't have a structurally sound heart. Does the heart maybe perform some degree of a pumping action in the future? Sure, but it is not a simple pump, which should lead people to be curious about what is blood. What is blood doing to the heart? Forget about what the heart's doing to the blood. And then, of course, if you start going down this path a little further, there is another, I believe he's Italian cardiologist. I can't remember his name, but he actually, and I had exchanged some emails, and he had described, some of like this notion that, okay, we've got a vortex, we've got, iron-rich substance going through this vortex. Could that produce a magnetic field? And of course, if you looked at the Heart Math Institute and whatnot, absolutely there's a magnetic field produced by the human. Could that be an impulse generated at the center of our chest in this pump that leads to some degree of coherence across the body? I certainly love that idea better than the mechanical pump model, because I just told you what I saw with hospice patients who had a left ventricular assist device and it wasn't doing anything. So that's all I really can say about the heart. Like, I think there's enough here for us to say, okay, it's not just a pump. And if we were to tie this into the materialism thing, if it's not a pump, then what is it? What an opportunity for us to understand more about who Alec is than just a bunch of parts all put together. And that's where I feel like curiosity's been lost. We're not asking the right questions. And that's a really, really elegant one.
Yeah, dude, oh my gosh, I've had so many thoughts on this that I think where I'm at right now, and again, I don't know, but this is purely speculation. Given the various religious and spiritual traditions across the earth over the course of time that have either directly stated or alluded to the heart being the seat of the soul, like the heart is mentioned over 800 times in the Bible, like guard your heart above all else.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's mentioned, I think, either 800 or 900 plus times in the Bible, which is super interesting. I think that there's a strong indication that the heart acts as the seat of our soul, and it is infusing our blood with the essence of our soul. And our vitality is directly linked to the ability of our soul to fully express and infuse itself into our blood and also into the other areas of fourth phase water inside our bodies, referring to both Gerald Pollack's work and Veda's work, and be the strongest coherent signal to imprint upon the bloods and the waters of our body. And we're in a dance with all the other both disruptive and coherent signals in reality that are also imprinting upon us. And how well can we allow the full expression of our soul to imprint upon our blood and our water versus the other signals that are there?
I mean, you bring up a lot. There's a lot of questions I have for that. And I don't know if it's like the right time to go into all of them, but even your line of thinking is far more elegant than you would expect from any medical journal. And that actually is important. It's important that we also realize that we don't know who we are. Because I don't know what a soul is, going back to that original question, I don't know what a soul is, but I know that I'm different from you. And I know from my own personal experiences that something comes after this. Where do I go after this? And am I still myself? And when babies come into the world, what's that all about? And if you read Brian Weiss's work, he's a psychiatrist in Miami. He's an older gentleman now, but Many Lives, Many Masters was his really big bestseller. Whether he's making it up or not, you hear about these things all the time. So how does the soul then interface with the physical body? This gets back into Steiner as well. You've got the physical, the etheric, the astral, the soul, and all of these are in this interplay at all times in order to make Alec. Why aren't we interested in that? Because going back to the birth, Kylie did not tell me about her vital signs. She described something that sounded like a whirlwind of spiritual activity. And for you and for your kiddo. So if it's not a medical procedure, what is it? It's a spiritual experience that happens to involve this perfect physical vessel to experience the myriad of beautiful things that we can only experience in our physical form here on earth. We have this animating force that is fed from above, fed from below, comes down in the center, and it's imbued into the blood through this elegant vortex, this toroidal, geometric something that allows our bodies to keep going. And if it doesn't, it can't do that anymore. Or if you lose the vitality, which is what I was seeing in these individuals with the LVADs, then it's not going to fix that because you've lost the vitality that is driving the whole system to begin with.
Which is interesting because you described that they felt like they didn't want to be here anymore, right? And
maybe they weren't here anymore, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. Like, I mean, my wheels in my mind just spin on this because it's like, if what I'm saying might be somewhat an aspect of correctness, I don't know. Like these experiences that you bring up would lend credence to that idea because it's like, it's diminishing their soul's ability to fully express through their being. Possibly, right?
You know what's interesting? I know you've interviewed people, German new medicine practitioners and whatnot. Homeopathy is a really, really great example of this. When you start to become curious about those types of ways of looking at it, and actually like real homeopathy, Rudy Verspor is the guy I mentioned before. It's not just take this pill for this, this remedy for this stuffy nose or whatever, which is what you find in Sprouts and these types of grocery stores. There's actually a deeply spiritual process by which he even comes to the clearance of inherited traumas, for example. Rudy is he's big into Steiner, he's big into German new medicine, and he's taken it a step further. And he's like, there aren't great tools within either of those fields. People are going to come at me after that, after me for that. But he's like, we still aren't clearing the inherited patterns through not just our ancestors, but like the collective consciousness that is leading to loose stools in an 18-month-old. That's how I got to work with Rudy. And look, within a month, after using every tool, every practitioner I could find, he was like, oh, she just picked up some inherited karmic trauma. Let's give her these wafers and work on it. And like, she was potty trained in a month. It was crazy. So we have to, the reason that this is important, the reason why I'm saying all of this is that because we're not asking the right answers and we're not willing to release ourselves from the dogma of this old story, we actually can't provide therapeutics to people. In German new medicine and anthroposophic medicine and homeopathy, they're actually now providing solutions to this very, very difficult to measure, very subjective experience that might happen in childbirth. We were talking about plant medicine journeys and whatnot. There is a healing that happens. It is healed. It is not keep going back to the therapist and talking through the traumatic things. Let's nip this in the bud and let's clear that because it's going to be passed on. And like this just becomes a big part of this storm. And because people aren't willing to recognize that we're asking the wrong questions. And maybe that model just isn't serving us. Maybe it's only partly serving us. We can't move forward. This is medicine at large, but it's especially relevant in childbirth.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how that applies in childbirth?
Which part?
Just how, like, let me ask a question related to this. Let's say there's a lot of people I know that talk about, or I guess really a relatively few number of people I know, Ayla Cuenca being one of them, talking about how, I love Ayla, talking about how as you're going into the birth process, it is really important, or it might be very important for the wife and the husband to revisit their own birthing experience to clear that before the wife gives birth to their baby. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think that's a really big conversation that we don't have. Let me use the example of men. You had at one point asked, like, how do men can show up in birth? Because men are oftentimes left out of the conversation. They then show up at the birth. They've never seen this. They've never been a part of this. And perhaps the only experience they have with childbirth is hearing their own birth story from their mother. Mine went a little bit like, oh, it was so painful. You split me open front to back, bleeding and pain and blah, 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 blah. And I have, issues later. My body never went back to normal and your dad didn't find me attractive anymore. Like there's all those little stories that came through in my own childhood. And so if I were to go back and ask that to my mom, this is what I tell all dads to do. I want you to go back to your mother and ask them your birth story and like be patient with it. Just draw it out of them. Nod and, listen, maybe take some notes, whatever you want to do. And then thanks, Mom. Thanks for sharing that. You could also ask your dad if you wanted. Now, what was it like to hold me for the first time? And then you'll start to see there's a frame shift and they start to remember what it was like to hold little Alec or little Nathan on their chest. And they're like, oh my gosh, it was so hard and all of that, but it was the most extraordinary moment of my life to hold my baby after going through this, which isn't actually what Ayla's speaking to. I guess I would just recommend people go and listen to Ayla because she does a very unique thing in talking about this. But what it does do is that helps the dad appreciate that he actually wasn't just a burden to his mother. He didn't just injure her. He also was the greatest thing that ever happened to her. And therefore, that actually helps him to frame shift from being afraid of birth to actually being excited about the birth. And so it sounds like a subtle thing, but imagine if you had never had a baby and you're going to have a home birth, you've been conditioned to believe that the only way to do this is in the hospital with an operating room and a blood bank and all that other stuff. And now you're hearing, oh, there is some possible dangers here. We'll get into free birth later. There's some possible things that could happen. But also, Kylie's about to go through the most incredibly like heart-centered experience of her life. She's going to feel empowered as a woman again, right? And so in retelling our own birth stories, this is not, again, what Ayla's speaking to, but in retelling our own birth stories, you actually can alter the way that your nervous system shows up. And that will ultimately imprint through mirroring with your partner that you are there and you are present, and you can be now the man holding space, holding ground with no problem to solve. Just, baby, I got you. You're doing this. And you know what that feels like. I'm almost getting choked up realizing, like remembering in the moment, seeing this woman who I fell in love with. We're high school sweethearts, by the way.
Same.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh,
since we're 16.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting to see her not as a maiden, but as a woman, as a mother, as a queen. And now realizing I'm in a matriarchy, and I'm so grateful that this person is able to do this, because I can never do this. And all I have to do is hold a boundary, be the mountain so that the river can rage. Men can't do that if they're afraid of being there. So on the one hand, I'll get back to what Ayla had said, what you were asking. But on the one hand, we just need to retell the story, especially for men, because we have no experience. We see it in movies, terrible. We hear about it, terrible. Nobody ever talks about how beautiful it is because they're afraid that they're going to trigger something in somebody who had a bad experience, right? Like, I don't want to boast because mine was so great and they had such a terrible experience. I just won't share. So all we hear is bad birth stories circulating. We need to get back to storytelling because it actually helps us men understand how important this is, have a reverence, not just for birth, but for the women in our lives, for our own mothers, for our sisters, for our daughters. How many girls do you have?
I have one girl.
You have one girl.
2 boys.
That is really a big part of our development as men. Like, forget about like masculinity and femininity and all that. Like, if you're going to show up, you can't be afraid of this. You have to actually see this as an opportunity to flex in every way your masculinity. And that looks a lot different than it does on TV or even in books or through Instagram.
It's holding a container, just like you said, as being the safety and security so that, just like you said, the river can fully rage.
That's right.
The woman can fully express in the birthing process.
Yeah.
And it's also being attuned to the difference between I can't do this, and it's like, no, you're right there. You're about to be in transition.
Bingo.
Versus, no, I can't do this. Something is wrong. Because there's a big difference between the two in my own direct experience, I will say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll get into, like, I think with the free birth conversation, like, and I'll just say it now, there's an opportunity also to start listening to women in a way where you can actually be guided more than the peer-reviewed literature or even my own experience. You can be guided as a part of the big story by a birthing family's intuition. Meaning if a dad says, I feel like something's wrong, it's probably something to explore there. We're not taught to listen to our intuition. We're taught that that's all, woo-woo or whatever.
Right.
Your intuition is authoritative knowledge, especially in childbirth. So if a woman I'm attending to in a home birth, which I haven't even told people, like, I don't do hospital births anymore. I only do home birth, and I support midwives across the country. If a midwife calls me up, or if I'm at a birth and somebody says, I feel like something's wrong, nonsense. Like, just forget about it. It's nothing. There's no data for that. Like, no, what are you feeling? What is coming up for you? And maybe it isn't relevant, but we should be listening. And that's also an opportunity for a man to start honing that listening. It's like, it's not just empathy. It's actually like, if you're telling me you're feeling something's off, maybe I should like look at the problem from a different side. You know something I don't. And the last thing I'll say to that, going back to what you had asked about clearing what your birth story was and everything else, and also to bring Rudy Verspor back in, who's the homeopathist I've been describing. When he starts working with you, like my daughter, so go back to her, Evie had loose stools for it was like 12 months. It was crazy. And we couldn't potty train her because it was just diarrhea. Otherwise, perfectly healthy kid, no vaccine, not even a birth certificate, for God's sake. Like, she did home birth, breastfed, organ meats, eggs, raw milk, like we did it all. And she's got loose stools. What's going on here? Everybody's hearing that. Well, she has loose stools because she drank what? Raw milk. No, that's not why, guys. We tried taking her off the raw milk too. Like, no, it wasn't that. We thought it was maybe dairy, but anyways, you're going to get somebody who's like, with their pitchfork. So eventually, a friend of mine, Jason Picard, he connected me with this guy, Rudy. And Rudy's lives up in Ontario. And he was like, oh, she's had a perfect life, but she inherited this karmic thing. And so when he worked with me, he was like, well, tell me about how you were born. And I had to tell him all of that stuff. And now we're remediating what happened in my own life with regards to my birth, perhaps even my mother's birth and her mother's birth and all of that other stuff. There's something there that might be causing a dandruff, or it might be causing a gut issue, or it might be causing a cancer someday, heaven forbid. The point here is that disease it manifests in the emotional body before it starts to emerge on the physical side of things. And allopathy and most naturopathy and everybody else actually is still just treating the outward external expression of disease, which started somewhere in the etheric, in the astral, somewhere deeper inside. So clearing all of that stuff with the help of Rudy could be a really, really virtuous thing to do. Let me say beneficial thing to do, not virtuous. A beneficial thing to do before you have a baby, especially if you had a traumatic birth or if there's something there in your childhood that hasn't been cleared. I think all of that comes up in childbirth. It's like a total disheveling of all of your stuff is going to come right here. It could be fear. It could be rejection. It could be insecurities. It could be anything. Forget about physical. It's that little thing that somebody said to you when you were a 6-year-old might come up in childbirth, because I hear people talk about this.
And if not childbirth, it'll come up when you're parenting. That I can tell you for sure, dude.
Speak from experience. And one last thing I want to say about the whole birth thing, because I know we're going to keep moving on, but we talked about oxytocin and we're talking about all these interventions. Michel Odent was a famous general surgeon. He worked as an OBGYN in Paris. He just died at the age of I think it was 95 or something, 97 maybe. He was a hero of mine, and he sent me all of his books signed, and he's since passed as of this past August. He's the first person who said to me, all of the induction of labor, all of the C-sections, this is what amounts to a world without love. And I'll just let that sit with people, because we've talked about a lot here, and people are like, but why does it matter? Nobody wants a dead baby. And yes, that's all true. And if we continue to sort of technologize, whatever the word is, to see this as just a strictly mechanical material problem, we're going to be left with a world where there's not a lot of love, not a lot of compassion. And that's actually the world that we're starting to see emerge. So this is really, really important. The way that birth happens, the way that we treat one another, that we show up at birth as men, this all really, really matters. I just wanted to plug that real quick, because that's important.
You bring up another really important thing in the outline is that 2020 study on inductions.
Oh, yeah.
Can you share about that a little bit?
Yeah. Did Stu talk to you about induction at all?
We talked about it.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot, but
sure.
It's great to hear it from another lens as well.
Well, the big question about induction of labor, and for those that don't know, we can use different substances that go in the vagina, go in the mouth, like in the cheek. We can use IV infusions of things. We can put mechanical balloons in there.
But let's talk about the premise before that, though, of why induction is quote unquote necessary in the first place.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. So for years and years and years, we have decided that there's a point above which babies have a higher risk of dying in the uterus. So that's called a stillbirth. And it turns out that until about 41, 42 weeks, there isn't really any significant difference. And even then, it's a higher relative risk versus a true absolute risk that anybody would be concerned about. We're still talking about 1 in the thousands, right? If you go to 42 weeks, it increases. If you go to 42 weeks in 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, all the way up to 43 weeks, it increases, right? So the longer you are pregnant, we become more and more concerned with the baby not surviving in the uterus. That's the general picture. When people want to pull out stats and whatnot, it's actually not relevant. It's too hard to generalize an independent, a specific risk number to ALEC from a general population of data. In fact, any number that is cited to you from the literature is going to be an average or a median, and nobody is average. Everybody either falls below the average or above the average. So my goal with all my lifestyle education and the, whatever I do in the environment, let's try to clean up this, let's add some oysters, let's add some organ meats, whatever, that's all helping you fall below the average. But I can't guarantee that everything's going to be fine. And when we start throwing numbers at people about your baby might die if we don't induce you, that's coercion, because it's actually not true that your baby will die or that there's even a X% chance. We don't know. And we have means of surveying and monitoring just to make sure that the baby's still moving well and all of that, starting with kick counts, starting with mom's intuition. First, the 2 primary things I look at. But in the event that we find some reason why a baby might be better outside than in, which is, we're finding reasons to do this far more than we should. It's about 30 to 35% of babies are induced. Wow. Where your body's not in labor. We have to force it to go into labor because we're worried about your diabetes or your blood pressure issues or whatever. Sometimes it's necessary, but not 35% of the time. The most common one, the reason that I'm picking on the whole stillbirth thing is that as you get later in pregnancy, it might just be like, hey, a casual conversation. You're at 39 weeks. Why don't we just get induction going? You know, and there was this big trial that came out in 2018 in the New England Journal, lots and lots of women enrolled, called the ARRIVE trial, that found there was a 4% lower C-section rate if we induced at 39 weeks versus let you go naturally, expectantly, as we say. But there was so many flaws with that, including, you know, protocols that were all over the place. You know, there's not a standard way to do it. The Hawthorne effect, where people that are being observed are going to be operating a little bit differently, maybe a little bit more patiently, knowing that they're a part of a study. And then there was also, you know, questions around, you know, when they compared the C-section rates in those two groups, they were both well below the national average. So they were like being good boys and girls, trying to get the highest vaginal birth rate that they could versus rushing to, you know, to C-section.
Some credence to induction.
It's like, yeah, lies, damn lies, and statistics or whatever. You know, you can play any story out with statistics. But anyways, back to your question, which is this California study. So the big question is, I don't want to, you know, what people will say is, I would rather avoid being induced because I heard it can increase my risk of C-section. Is that true? It depends. The reason it depends is for all of the factors I just described. You know, a physician might be really, really patient. They might be very impatient. They might have a really low threshold to do C-section because they just had a baby that died last week because they didn't do a C-section. I mean, they're humans as well. They make errors. It could be because they have a nurse who just, who isn't feeling well that day. I mean, it could be like literally anything can play into the likelihood of you having a C-section after an induction. But we have tried to study this. California offers a unique example because there's a lot of hospitals in California. It's something like, I think I wrote it down here. I think it's something like 246 hospitals. I don't think it's listed here, but this was a published paper back in 2020 looking at almost every hospital in California. What they were looking at is low-risk women who go through induction of labor. What is the risk that they're going to give birth by C-section? To answer this age-old question. The findings were actually quite interesting because actually it wasn't a number that came out. It was a range. And you know the answer to this already. It ranged anywhere from 18 to 84.6% based on which hospital you're in and which provider, as we call. Provider is not a term I use. It's a business term. But whether you had a CNM, certified nurse midwife, or an OBGYN. So the person who was attending to you and the hospital that you were at made a huge difference. So that means that some women, some hospitals who were a part of this study, or who provided data for this study, they had women who had an up to 84% chance of having a C-section after induction. In some hospitals, as low as 18%. So does it lead to an increased risk of C-section? It depends. And that is, I brought this example up because it actually does matter. Because every time that we give these numbers, it almost always depends. There are great OBGYNs doing great work who have very low C-section rates. But no, you know, if you were to poll everybody and say, hey guys, we're doing a lot of unnecessary C-sections, who's doing them? Like, who's raising their hand?
No one's going to admit that. No one's going to admit that. You know, what's really interesting going back to our birth experience, right? So with our first, and I want to preface this by saying we actually loved the OBGYN that we had. And we now realize that they're just doing the best they had with the information they had at that time. Like, despite all the complications surrounding the birth of our first child. But there was a defining moment that happened both in our second birth and our first birth where things went drastically different, like a complete divergence in experience.
Both in the hospital, same doctor?
One was in a hospital and one was at a birthing center.
Oh, right. Okay.
And when I say birthing center, it's a birthing center in Wichita Falls, Texas, that is literally just a house that they've converted into a birthing center.
Birthing suites,
yeah. And it had a master bedroom with a like bathtub that my wife ended up giving birth in. But with our first birth, Kylie looks at me, looks at the OBGYN, primarily looking at the OBGYN, right? Like assuming like I really didn't have as much of a role. Now in our subsequent births, much more hands-on, right? Much more involved.
Why was that? Just
empowered education, understanding like that this is a very normal, natural, biological process of a woman, that the man, maybe there's arguments surrounding men weren't traditionally involved if we're referring back to how it was done in past iterations of society. But like me as the masculine presence, as the father, I'm there to be the security blanket, the one to, you know, stand my ground, set boundaries, and even be the intermediary. I'm not necessarily saying that there's going to be conflict that comes up between yourself and the midwife or something like that, but you're the one that is there trying to ensure that we're following the birth plan as much as we can and advocating for your wife. Like that's what you're there doing. With that being said, the first birth, Kylie looked at the OB and basically said, I don't know if I can do this. And then instantly the OBGYN was like, all right, let's start prepping you for C-section. That's okay. It's okay. This happens.
Yeah.
Versus second birth, Kylie looks at me and our midwife is standing right there. And she's like, I don't know if I can do this. And our midwife goes, no, honey, you're right there. I promise. Because she recognized, oh, she's just in transition. This is going to get a little bit more difficult, but she's going to be just fine. In that 1 to 5 second,
everything changed.
Everything changes right there. Right there. So I'd imagine with these statistics, it depends on the provider and
that's a
the
great
woman's tendency to outsource to people in white coats exclusively rather than trusting their own intuition. Because after that second experience, with our third birth, when Kylie was in transition and she started feeling inside like, I don't know if I can do this, she recognized, no, I'm just in transition.
Yeah. Right. She was familiar with it. Yeah.
She's familiar with it.
Well, and there's some kudos there for you and your midwife, which is like, you know how strong she is.
Yeah.
Like she just in that moment is not there. So when a woman walks into a hospital and like, I've got 2 little girls, so I'm just going to speak from what I'm afraid of for them. They have to grow up in a world where, you know, men are going to be looking at them. They're going to be objectifying them. It is a part of our society. I don't like it. It actually kind of makes me pissed off now. Was I a young man who probably, you know, looked down a girl's shirt when I was like a young guy? Yeah. Like I know that is a part of how we're raising little boys too. And we have this place where women don't feel safe because of the way that I behaved when I was a little boy. And I'm talking about little boy guys. I'm not saying like I was just out on the street in Austin and I was doing this. Like we grow up to be men and we have little girls and now we're like, holy smokes, the way I was behaving as a little boy, I would hate to see that behavior with a boyfriend or a kid in the playground. I don't know, playground is kind of young, but anyways, you know, the point is little girls have to grow up in a world that worrying about things that us boys don't generally have to worry about. And most of the time, I'll use my wife's example. When she was walking home from the bar as a bartender years ago,
your wife was a bartender too?
She was, yeah.
My wife was a bartender in college.
Dude, we're like we need like a family vacation to the beach or something.
I know. That's crazy.
She's walking home and she's like, you know, I don't know if you've ever appreciated how every single time I leave work, 2 a.m., the bar's let out, south side of Pittsburgh, the longest strip of bars, I think, in the country. That's what I've been told. There's fights, there's knives, there's guns. She walks home and she's like, I'm hoping I'm going to get home every single night. And it's a path. She's walked every single day after work. But she's like, you guys don't understand how we've lived with that our entire life. Heaven forbid she is a woman of color, but she has lighter skin. You know, she's Mexican, but she has lighter skin. She's passably white. Heaven forbid she's a black woman or a woman who doesn't speak English. And you run into the wrong guy. It's usually guys, unfortunately. And you're now like fawning. You actually smile and you're like trying to be polite, or some guy comes up and he's drunk at the bar and you're like, ah. She's like, I have done that so many times to preserve my own life. Not knowing if they were dangerous or not, but I just need to be sure. And then as we've talked about this, I realized, okay, now we're expecting women to go into the hospital in the throes of labor and to push back on an authority figure who probably looks like me while they're not even there, Alec. And we're saying, you got to put your dukes up. You got to fight. No, that's not when this begins. We actually start in my program at Born Free Method. We start by saying no thank you to your partner. You want to have sex tonight? No, not really. I mean, if you want to have sex, go have sex. But the point is like, if you don't feel like you want to do that, or you don't want to go to the movies with your friends, start saying no thank you to the people that you trust and you care about. And then saying no to policymakers and hospital staff and whatnot comes a little bit more naturally. But even so, having a partner there that's going to advocate by just practicing no thank you. No thank you is kryptonite to medical professionals. You're not going to argue. You're not going to out physiology them. You're not going to out data them. No thank you goes a long way. But that requires somebody who's very sure and true of themselves, and somebody like you who's standing there witnessing what they're going through. That will give them the strength. And it's not going to come from like my briefcase filled with papers to justify why I was unwilling to do unnecessary vaginal exams. It's going to come from you just being so sure and true to who you are that we have no option but to just let things unfold.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen, man.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the HPV Gardasil vaccine now?
I think we should.
Okay.
I think that's a big one. I noticed the comments in your Facebook thread with Stu. People were asking about this.
I didn't make a Facebook post for you because we could also carry over.
Yeah. No. It's totally, I didn't even notice if there was one for me. I think this is an important conversation because it also ties into a lot of what you've done in virology. And of course, we don't want to rehash the whole thing about the Human Genome Project, but back in 2023, BBC put out this paper that said, hey, turns out we actually never fully sequenced the human genome. And if we did, there's still this, 8 to 10% chance that we're missing some big chunks. There's some big mistakes that could be made here. And so that would be, comparable if we were to take a sample out of your body and say, aha, this doesn't belong to you. Like, well, we don't know if it belongs to you because we have no idea what your sequence is to begin with. So I summarized a big chunk of what Dr. Cowan teaches in the new biology curriculum. If anybody wants to go and do it, it will just open your eyes to new ways of looking at things. But the reason I brought this one up is that we continue to produce vaccines against things that we have no idea of knowing whether or not it's actually a bad guy or just part of us. And what let me start, for those who don't know, by telling you the story of HPV. So the idea here is that you, because you were just so smitten with that person at the bar, you went home with them and you contracted this sexually transmitted infection called human papillomavirus, which is a very, very small little DNA virus. And once it gets into your body as a woman, it finds its way to your cervix. It causes cells to change until you die of cancer. That's basically the story. And I know I'm sounding crass here, but I'm trying to get through this because it's a story that most people have heard. And it's the story that is played out in COVID. It's played out everywhere. You got this infectious thing that came into you and it managed to find its way to a part of your body. And now that part of your body needs to be removed. We have ways of screening for it. We do a pap smear, which collects little cells from the inside of your cervix and around the outside. And then we have a swab that presumably detects HPV. If either of those remains positive or abnormal, you may find yourself getting a painful biopsy. No lidocaine, no anesthesia. Just take a big chunk out of your cervix. This is a sexual organ with a lot of nerve endings, just as important for orgasm as the clitoris, just so everybody knows. If that is really problematic, like if it comes back as something called cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, CIN 2 or 3, and that doesn't go away, then you might find yourself facing what's called a LEAP procedure, where we take a hot wire, electrified wire, and just lop off the top of your cervix. You may also find yourself facing hysterectomy because, hey, that womb is just for making babies. You're done having babies anyways. Let's just remove it. That is not the answer that most women want. So HPV, it's very, very common. Based on this story, there's about 14 million people every year diagnosed. There's about 80 million people living with HPV. If you have HPV, you have about a 90% chance of clearing it in 2 years. That's great. If you get that biopsy and it shows CIN, the likelihood of that CIN 1, just inflammation progressing, is about 5%. Nothing to worry about. If it's CIN 2 or CIN 3, and the reason we are going over this is we're going to talk about Gardasil in a second. CIN 2 is intermediately bad. CIN 3 is, oh my gosh, this is pre-cancer. CIN 2 has a likelihood of going backwards, regressing of about 60%, which is good, without doing anything. This is the general population, not bad. CIN 3, about 50-50 if it's going to go backwards or go forwards. So if you end up with cervical cancer, you're one of the very, very few, less than 1% chance. But it is a nasty, nasty disease. But is it caused by HPV? That's the big question. So because we're so worried about this, and so many of us have little girls and little boys, which, by the way, the only way to detect this thing is by putting that swab in the cervix. There's no antibodies. There's no reliable way of detecting it in men. It does also cause warts. And if we take a wart off, there's a chance we will find what we call HPV in the wart. But we'll get to that as well, because this is quite interesting. Here's the news story. And the news story is actually, let's say it's preceded by questions, such as, why are there no antibodies? Why are some women affected and others not? Similar to smoking. Does smoking cause cancer, Alec?
I don't know if there's any evidence that it does.
Some people who smoke get cancer. That's what I will say.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Have you seen the meme of like comparing Brian Johnson, the biohacking guy?
Oh yeah.
To the
not Liver King guy. Same name, by the way.
Yeah, same name. The don't die guy, that Brian Johnson, to a 100-year-old Italian man. It's like, this guy's counting like macros and micros. This guy is like injecting himself with a bunch of synthetic stuff, projected age 100. And then the Italian man doesn't even know what a macro micro is, hasn't worked out since World War II.
And chain smokes.
Chain smokes. Projected age 100.
He drinks wine that's been fermenting for too long in his garage. Yeah, for ages. Yeah. Drinks it every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right. Yeah. So we have this really, really strange continued issue with causation and correlation. And going back to literally everything we've talked about, I'm not asking anybody to discard everything because I'm going to give them the answer. What I'm saying is that if you have some way that you think the world works, if you have this model for how the world works, it's okay to try to reverse engineer that to see if you're right, okay? And when you find that a part of your investigation doesn't fit, then you have to change your model.
Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember.
And this is such an important piece because our actions and our words and the way our body expresses, or the way our physiology expresses, to use that word, I'm sorry, but is predicated, I would argue, largely on our beliefs, thoughts, and feelings.
Absolutely.
And your beliefs, thoughts, and feelings are very clearly colored by exactly what we're talking here, which is why it would behoove of us to dissolve those conditioned fear-based beliefs and get to the root and question whether these various supposed causal relationships actually exist. It's incredibly important that we do that.
It's important, and it's actually not that hard. It just requires us to get over this through this cognitive dissonance that tells you that you couldn't be right in questioning that. Actually, you can be. You can question everything. You can question everything from the double helix in DNA to the heart is not a pump. Like, you can question everything. You might not be right, and that's okay. What do you have to lose? But to be like, well, wait a second, why aren't there antibodies? Why is it only detectable in women? And why is it that not every woman that gets HPV gets cancer, and not everybody who has cancer necessarily has HPV? Or the same strain or whatever. And how do we even know it's HPV, this HPV is a thing if we don't know what's human, what's bacterial, what's fungal, what's rodent, what's whatever. I got like a little bit of ALEC on my finger here. Now ALEC is a part of my sequence if you somehow were able to put me into a sequencing machine. And another important thing that I really haven't mentioned is some virginal women have an HPV positive test. Well, it's a false positive. Okay. But like, why wasn't that other person's false positive? Like, you're just jumping to conclusions to fit the story that you've already decided is the only way to look at it. So when I heard about this is actually a reason I reached out to Tom Cowan. And I was like, I don't understand this. Like you're going to have to help me understand even the process, the procedures by which they're isolating and purifying. I'm not going to get into that because you've covered that really, really well. I said, but I'm going to do this with cervical cancer. I'm going to go all the way down the rabbit hole. And it got me all the way back to like the 1940s. And I actually had him look over this. And I was like, what are they talking about here? And he's like, well, this is this and this is this. It was like the 40s, like different techniques never even heard of before. But what it ultimately amounted to was we're going to remove warts. These are the earliest papers, Alec. And this is during the 1940s when we were convinced that viruses caused every cancer, which we haven't yet shaken, obviously. But they were taking rodents that had warts. And warts also are considered, HPV related. You take the warts of these rodent stuff, grind them up, add a bunch of chemicals, centrifuge them down, put the pellets into rodents without warts, and you're going to put them behind their ears and in the capsules of their kidneys, probably because of like the blood flow and whatnot. And they wanted some epidermis involved up here. So some of those rodents got warts. It must be the virus. And I don't want to totally unhash this because you do such a good job on the show, but I hope people can appreciate how that doesn't really show much of anything. And so we do know that if we were to take cervical cancer tumors out of the human being, cut them up and splice them up, that we could find this strip of nucleic acid that we now attribute to human papillomavirus, but we don't know how that compares to the human DNA. We won't keep going down that same path. But I just say this to illustrate that there might be some issues with this story, because what we've been doing, which is largely driven by excisional procedures where women lose a part of their sexual gratification through the loss of a cervix, which also can lead to preterm labor. It can get scarred up. You can become asensate, meaning no feeling at the cervix. It can have all kinds of implications. And when women have parts of their body that they were born with removed unnecessarily, they're not so happy with us. But the only thing that's being offered is screening, swabbing, biopsies, and then removal. I do have something I can add to this in a second.
I want to get your take on pap smears and everything like this after we finish this part too.
Yeah. I will try, because man, the conditioning is so hard when you're like doing this for a living. And I also have to be careful because I'm still a licensed physician in 22 states. But let me just address that now because you brought it up, because we'll talk about Merck to the rescue here with their Gardasil vaccine in a second. So do I think it's okay to get, or a good idea to get pap smears and HPV swabs and whatnot? I would say right now, if you're concerned about this diagnosis of cervical cancer, you might as well get screened. The problem with getting screened is there aren't many options as to what you're going to do with that once you get screened. Because from a screen, you have to go to a test, which is when we get the full tissue sample it's like a sharp claw. And it like literally is grab and pull. Imagine doing that to the head of a penis, like just ripping flesh out.
I mean, we're going to talk about circumcision at some point during this.
Yeah, right. There you go. So we have this process whereby then, if you need the excision, which is the a LEEP procedure or a cold knife cone, there's some other things. There's also escharotic therapies, which are very intensive, lots of application of substances. None of those things actually gets to the root of the problem. If there's some, as we were describing, disease manifesting first in the emotional body and then coming out physically, or even if it's a thyroid issue or a hormonal issue or whatever that was going on upstream that the functional medicine docs might pick up, nobody's addressed any of that. We're just, you can't get brain cancer if I cut your head off. So there we go. You can't get cervical cancer if I cut your cervix off. I've actually added to the list of things that can be done. I actually started investigating a vaginal regimen using ivermectin and curcumin that we can have compounded. There's one pharmacist that I have found that can make this work. We put it into a cervical, like a menstrual disc, slip it into the vagina, let it soak overnight, put in another dose in the evening. And you're taking orally active hexose correlated compound, which is an extract from the mycelia of shiitake mushrooms alongside EGCG, which is a green tea extract. When we use that for 8 to 12 weeks, we actually can get a reversal of those abnormal biopsy results, but it's still not addressing the upstream cause, which gets into everything else we've already described. I appreciate that
you acknowledge that, because most people would say, oh, we've finally gotten to the root. And it's like,
I would be hypocritical because I just accused all the alternative practitioners from not fixing anything. You're actually still palliating. You're still doing the allopathic thing, but this will at least save us time while we investigate those upstream things.
Got it. I love
and we
that.
save you a trip to the operating room.
Love that.
So if it's important for you to detect this and it's the only way for your gynecologist to be happy with you, then you do it. My wife has cried when she goes in for the pap smears. It just feels so invasive. She doesn't like it. It doesn't necessarily hurt. I think it's more just like you're inside of me and I don't want you in there. And so I'm not going to say don't go and get a pap smear. What I will say is that I think we need to be asking, what if this is positive? What are you willing to do? If you're not going to do anything with it anyways, then why go and get the screen? Do I think cervical cancer is real? Absolutely. But I don't think we have sufficient evidence to support the notion that HPV is always causing cervical cancer, or that cervical cancer is always caused by HPV. And I'll just leave it at that.
I'll say that we don't even know if HPV as a distinct physical particle even exists. You don't have to say that. I'll say
No. I feel like I've already said that. Like, I don't know what that thing is.
Exactly.
It's detecting something. What I think, so here's actually the news story. I didn't really elaborate on the news story. The news story is that in answering these questions, that there's some insult. It could be energetic. It could be emotional. It could be traumatic. It could be physical, like poison stuff you're putting in your vagina, like on tampons or whatever. It could be any of those things, and bad diet, and the poor soil, and the poor food, like all of those things. Something leads to abnormal cells, and they form on the cervix. And those abnormal cells, in their division and their, replication and all of that, some of them die, some of them live. We get these sort of abnormal architecture. Some of those abnormal cells lyse, and then we have a release of nucleic acid, which we then pick up at the cervix. And it's probably our own nucleic acid. That's what I think is happening. I think that we have what does Tom Cowan say? War and Peace. You blow up a library and you get little fragments of paper. We put those papers together and we say, oh, this looks just like that other swab from that other lady with cervical cancer. Oh, it must be that this little thing is responsible. No, I actually think this is like blaming the shop boy cleaning up the spilled milk for the milk having spilled in the first place. So that's actually what I think. And I have no problem saying that. It's just hard to say, like, maybe we will find that there's some utility to screening with a pap smear. Maybe it says, oh, there's abnormalities being formed here. We need to do some work. Maybe it's an invitation for us to look deeper.
That's fair. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I can totally see that.
Sort of like getting a CT of your whole body, which don't do anybody, but it's like a million x-rays. But it's like, oh, you found that thing. Now you know you can work on that thing.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
So I'll say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Merck and Gardasil.
Yeah. So Merck had this giant scandal back in late 90s, I think it was. Vioxx was basically another ibuprofen, and Ed said that they were advertising as another non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. It's pain relief. They had a lot of people that had heart issues with this. In fact, now it's like one of those warnings for any NSAID because of what happened with Vioxx. And it became a scandal. They got sued for millions of dollars, and they were going to go bankrupt. They needed a Hail Mary. They launched they started working on a fix for this cervical cancer thing, which was promised as a vaccine that we could give to young women before they have sex in order to prevent them from getting cervical cancer, right? That's how it was advertised. And it's important that we say that's how they advertised it. There was a couple problems with it. And prior to FDA approval, they did a number of trials, which, whether you like it or not, guys, when you look at the actual safety data that's produced by most of these companies that are producing vaccines, many of the studies are not placebo controlled. A real placebo would have a completely inert substance. Like, it'd be like giving somebody talcum powder instead of an active medication. You have to use something that is completely inert in the body. Although somebody might argue talcum powder is active in some way. It dries your mouth out or something. Anyways, they got this data, and they had, most of the studies, there was at least some form of aluminum adjuvant in the placebo. And they showed, hey, there's not a big difference in adverse effects between this one and this one. And this one has the active agent, which is the viral particle, so to speak. This one doesn't have the viral particle, but it has all this other junk in it. So maybe you have, 50%, let's say 10% of women in this group have a serious reaction. 10% in this group have a serious reaction. It's no worse than placebo. The FDA approves it. It goes out to the market, and it crushes, Alec. It's in every single doctor's office, family medicine, gynecologist, everybody is giving this. And now it's available to boys and girls as early as age 9. It's a 2 or 3 dose series. And the reason I even got like really, really into this, forget COVID, it was because I have little girls and I know that they're going to be offered this. So we have a product that comes to market using placebo controlled trials. And it is the only way to guarantee that you won't have cervical cancer. I'm highlighting that because one of the big issues with, and by the way, I included this graphic here. It's one of many graphics that's available in HPV Vaccine on Trial by Mary Holland. She's an attorney alongside Kim. Can't remember her last name. It's a great book. It's hard to read because it's a lot of like really, really sad stories, but it talks about how there's ongoing litigation in all 50 states because of this issue. And there's more to it. So actually, before we get into like the problems, why don't we just say like, does it work? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Depends on what you mean by work, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the basic premises of vaccination, like the primary efficacy endpoint for vaccination trials, is either antibody production or symptom reduction, right? And in either case, where has it been validated inside a fully intact human being that you have better health outcomes upon having antibody production? There's a whole separate conversation that needs to be had regarding what antibodies actually are.
I'm with you.
The suppression of symptoms.
Yeah.
Does suppression of symptoms equal health?
Right.
Because we're talking about a health claim here. Like you could argue like, well, we're targeting specific quote unquote diseases, and these diseases lead to possibly, statistically speaking, these other health complications, blah, 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 blah. But we're still talking about a health claim. We're talking about a health claim. And so when we look at the health of an individual over the long term,
it's an outcome is what you're,
exactly.
Yeah.
So when we compare the health of someone who has had repetitive symptom reduction, which is the primary efficacy endpoint in a lot of the vaccine trials in order to say that they're efficacious, versus those who have not had repetitive symptom reduction, what are the long-term health outcomes when you compare the two groups? That's never been done.
That's all that matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's all that really matters. So, even a lot of in the alternative health space, I'm not going to pick on this company because I'm friends with the owners, but to say that your device, let's say somebody has hepatitis, right? My device will lower the liver enzymes in people with hepatitis. Who cares that you lowered the liver enzymes? The liver enzymes aren't what making you sick. The liver enzymes are a consequence of the disease. Yes. Did this person die of the disease? Did you prevent them from dying from the disease? Because that's really what should matter. Right. And if we're using these points, what you're describing is a surrogate endpoint. Yep. So we say, okay, listen, and Merck is smart. These are not unintelligent people. They get this. But if they're going to say our device prevents cervical cancer and it takes years to decades from the time that you're exposed to, quote, this so-called HPV to the point where you get cancer, if it takes years to decades for that to happen, that whole process, they can't wait around. They're bankrupt. They need to get this market out, this device out on the market. So instead they say, well, we know that SIN2 or SIN3, that's the biopsy proven result, that could progress to cervical cancer. Remember, a big chunk of it regresses. 50-50 with SIN3, right? 60-40 regression, progression with SIN2. And those are all very subjective. By the way, it's a separate conversation.
Also a conversation to be had on whether a biopsy itself leads to worse outcomes. There's a whole separate category too.
I agree with you because, we've taken now living tissue from a person, just like I said with lab work. We take biopsy, we take this tissue, now we're going to slice it up, add a bunch of stains and chemicals, put it under a microscope. And this is how we're diagnosing disease. Right. There are certain instances in which somebody might argue that for this cancer, we can say that we saved this person's life in this and that, but that is also a very, very imperfect part of the allopathic model of cancer diagnosis and maintenance, let's just say. So Merck smartly, instead of saying, they weren't smart because they end up advertising that this prevents cervical cancer, but instead of studying whether or not this actually modifies your risk of getting cervical cancer, let alone dying from cervical cancer, they say, well, let's use these other endpoints, SIN2 and SIN3, because we know, I'm using air quotes on my end if you're listening, that's going to lead to cancer. But it doesn't, because I just said a lot of it regresses. So this is actually the reason that Merck is under fire, because they advertised this as the One Less campaign was, it's going to prevent cervical cancer. You never showed us that it prevents cervical cancer, and that's false advertising. And that is potentially, I don't want to say it's malpractice because they're not physicians, but that's what it would be. You're telling me that this drug does this thing and it doesn't do that thing. So that's the big concern here. Does it work? We really don't know. Maybe it does. If there was something that said my little girls would never get cervical cancer and had no side effects, of course I would take that thing. But that's not how medicine works. That's not how these devices work. But what could it hurt? Now here's where we get into the interesting stuff. Because what could it hurt? Why not? Right? Forget about, now let's just start with the aluminum. We'll get it out of the way. Everybody's always talking about the adjuvants. There's polysorbate 80 that helps stuff get across the blood-brain barrier, presumably. And, people living with autism and Alzheimer's, they have deposits of aluminum in their brains, more so than other people on posthumous autopsy. This one was a brand new form, amorphous aluminum hydroxyphosphate sulfate. I mean, that's a mouthful. And we don't know why they put them in there. I know you've talked about all of this, but that alone could be a big problem in this conversation around autism or, cognitive disorders in the elderly. Doesn't really matter. It's something that's worth investigating. Yeah. A bigger thing with this particular product is, let's say that, somebody that we love, they have they're a woman, they go into their gynecologist's office, they're found to be HPV positive. If they're found to be HPV positive and they never got the Gardasil series, the doctor might say, well, you never had the Gardasil series. What could it hurt? Merck's own safety data found that there was negative efficacy of their vaccine if you're already screened positive for this so-called HPV. So you had a higher chance of developing SIN2 or SIN3. That's the advanced cervical intraepithelial neoplasia if you were already positive for HPV. So something's going on with the immune system or whatever. I'm a little bit dubious even about how the immune system works. Like I've gone back and looked at the textbooks and it's just like, it's little illustrations. It's just too much of that for me. But we know the immune system plays some role in clearing precancerous cells. Obviously, this is having some detrimental effect to that. I don't really know. And here's the big kicker for me. You know, we have like greater chance of miscarriage in their own safety data. It was like 30% of the women who were enrolled in the trial who got pregnant, they had a higher risk of miscarriage. It was about 27% were the baseline, somewhere in like the like 10 to 15% range. So we saw more miscarriages happening in this study group. There was also some concern brought up around their safety trials related to premature ovarian failure, kind of something similar to what we were hearing about the nanoparticles of the COVID vaccines, concentrating in the gonads of men and women. But here's the kicker. Now, you're going to have to pay attention to these numbers here, and I had to write them down. This is Merck's own package insert. 128 of the 15,706 participants, that's 81 and a half roughly. Let's just call it 81 in 10,000. Enrolled in the study experienced a serious adverse reaction. Okay, 81 in 10,000 and 21 of them died. This is meant to prevent cervical cancer. So cervical cancer is pretty rare, but let's go to a place where it's not so rare. East Africa. I used to spend a lot of time in Malawi. Malawi is going to have a cervical cancer rate of roughly 4.27 in 10,000. So even in an area with a high lifetime risk, let's say, it's very endemic there, you have a 4.27 out of a 10,000 chance versus an 81 in 10,000 chance of a serious adverse reaction from the vaccine itself. That's a 20-fold increased risk by taking the vaccine over maybe I'll take my chances because the United States, the risk of cervical cancer is even lower. And so that's the cervical cancer rate. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but we have a big problem with this Gardasil vaccine. We have a big problem with the story of HPV and cervical cancer, and our little girls need us. They're relying on us to go deeper with this stuff. So I've dedicated quite a bit of my time there, not here in this conversation, but just trying to figure this out. And if you want, we could also talk about, you know, like Edmund Knight, and I think you've had him on your show, or he's coming on.
I'll have him on. Yeah, I think is not the next guest, but the guest after the next one.
Yeah, so there's like a lot. Edmund's also like can geek out on Steiner like anybody I've ever heard. And Steiner had said the process of an illness is connected with soul phenomenon. So this goes back to you're more than just the sum of your parts. This is the thread of our conversation. Edmund has a child who was born with trisomy 21, Down syndrome, and autism, high needs autism. And when I asked him about it in our conversation, I was like, so naturally people are going to wonder like vaccines or whatever. He was like, yeah, vaccines are probably very problematic, but it's not, but he actually takes it a step further. This gets into something you were mentioning before. Every part of how a vaccine is made, the intention behind the person injecting it, how those different adjuvants and everything were procured. What was the intention? What was the experience of the people that were doing this? What was the intention of the person receiving it? He said that actually matters far more to me. I think he said this. I'll just say what I took from that is that matters as much, if not more, than what's actually in the vaccine itself, which is probably relatively inert. You combine all the other stuff and you have this perfect storm of potential problems at the soul level for the individual if we're going to take anything from Steiner.
Of it.
Yeah.
100%.
So there's a lot of reasons for us to be asking this question, I guess is my point. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual.
You know what's interesting on that note, a friend of mine who has a nonverbal autistic child that is incredibly high needs, let's say. One of the autists who's learned how to use a spelling board that is able to use some extrasensory capabilities in order to communicate and function relatively well, let's say.
Yeah.
So the mother, I'm being vague on the name here because I don't know if she's shared this publicly. She has been a podcast guest of mine, but the mother of this child just felt demoralized upon realizing that her daughter's autism was likely related to vaccination because she noticed a clear difference both
like before and after that visit or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's so sad.
Her daughter has shared though, Mom, I knew I was coming into this. I knew that this was what I was signing up for. I remembered beforehand.
Yeah.
And that's not to exonerate the vaccine industry or not to say that like, oh, it's all okay that harmful things happen. That's why we're having conversations like this, so we can help provide a different lens on these topics so people can make a more informed decision in their own lives. But it's just to further illustrate that we don't have the full story here. We're still discovering that full story. We're in the process of remembering both with respect to ourselves and the larger society and what it means to be in this realm. And there's so much mystery involved with it. And I think that for any of the moms listening out there, whether you had a C-section that you didn't plan for and you feel some shame and guilt associated with that, or you vaccinated or maybe you got your son circumcised, like there's a soul level decision that I think is happening where our kids and we knew at some level what we were signing up for, I believe.
I do too. And we're going to get into free birth here in a little bit. There's a part of this conversation that's really uncomfortable for people, which it almost sounds like fatalistic or nihilistic. And that's actually, I think people on both sides of the vaccine conversation actually need to broaden their horizon a little bit, because there's more to this than get the aluminum out of the vaccines and we're not going to have autism anymore. Like, are you crazy? Like it is not just one thing.
It's not just vaccines either, by the way. Like not even close. It's not just vaccines either.
No, not at all. Not at all. No. And I could give many, many examples, but to go back to what you were saying, a baby dies in the womb. It's a terrible thing for a family to go through. What I'm about to say is not a bypass for the grieving in the morning and the hardship that brings to that family. It's very tragic, but sometimes babies actually didn't intend on coming into the world. They actually came in and they went out before they could even be born. Either they decided it wasn't time, or they decided this is just what I'm going to do this time around. Because we aren't willing to get out of our lens of materialism that we view everything with, we can't even conceive of that. And actually, I'll say, like, people who are steeped in their own religious dogma fall into this trap as well. Like, just because that baby didn't come in, it does not actually mean that God let something bad happen to you. It could have been something far beyond that, something bigger than that. This baby's sole contract with you was, hey, Dad, you're strong. I'm going to need you to be my dad and for Kylie to be my mom so you can take care of her, because in her go around, she's going to have to go through some really, really hard stuff. It's like a part of her dharma. And in order for her to experience the utmost despair and grief, she's going to need somebody strong by her side. And that's why you're going to be my dad. Like, this is where we can really start to get creative in our understanding of the world without just naming and blaming and reducing ourselves back to the same conversation around good and evil, around vaccines, anti-vax, pro-vax. Like, it's just not interesting. We have to transcend this a little bit.
Yeah. Amen, man. Let's talk about circumcision, since I had already brought that up a little bit.
Yeah. We can touch on this one, briefly. For starters, I was circumcised when I was a little boy. I don't know if that was good or bad, because I don't know what it's like to have foreskin. Everything seems to be working down there. Sure. The issue I have with circumcision now, and the reason I advocate against it, in fact, I have very few hard no's. This is one that's like a hard no, except in extremely unusual situations. This is a completely unnecessary medical procedure. And the reason I can speak to this is, unlike a lot of the health influencers and people jabbering on podcasts, I actually used to do circumcisions. That's a part of what an OB-GYN does nowadays. I've probably done hundreds of them. We use lidocaine every single time.
Can you describe the process fully? I know that might get graphic, but I think people need to hear this. Yeah,
let's just talk about it, because there's a lot of people that are talking about it, but they actually don't know what it's about. So we take the baby from the mother into a separate room. And the reason we do that is because we don't want people videotaping in case something goes wrong. That's my opinion. I think that's the only reason it makes sense. It's not like it's in a special sterile room or anything. It's all sterile equipment. We use a clamp called a Gomco. That's the most common way to do it. We strap the baby down. We put some sugar on their tongue. It's their first taste of Sour Patch Kids. You can imagine how that takes you into blissful, oblivion. You're on a warmer. There's a nurse there. There's a doctor there. Maybe there's another person there, but you just need two people. We strap the baby's arms and legs down. I think that there's probably ways of not strapping the baby down, but that's how I always saw it done. Because I want them moving and squirming. Their diapers off. We then will just kind of figure out where we're gonna where the skin is. Like we want to have a nice cosmetic. We're just obsessed with the cosmesis of a baby's penis. We want to make sure it looks good, whatever that means. As if you're not circumcised, you don't look good or something. Like it's so absurd. Then we will clean the area and we inject a little bit of lidocaine into, I believe it's called the penile nerve. It's been so long since I've done it, almost 15 years maybe, which is a nerve block to the nerve endings that supply that area of the penis, right? We then take a clamp where we put this protective bell over top, and then we put this metal piece around and then pull the foreskin around the bell. So we put the bell on the glands of the penis, pull the skin up around, and then we just cut around the bell, around the extra flap of skin there. It's a little hard to maybe picture if you haven't seen it, but then we toss that, we discard the skin and we make sure that there's no bleeding and take off the clamp and that's that. Take the baby back to mom. Pretty inconsequential, right? There's a couple reasons that I want to talk about this. And the first is that when you're told that there's a lesser chance of penile cancer and less time, it's cleaner, there's lesser chance of STD. Even this is so easy to find online that I didn't even pull the study. Those early studies that showed that men who are circumcised have lower rates of STDs than uncircumcised men. If you look at actually what they did for those two groups, the interventions, the one group was given condoms, they were given education. This is the circumcised group. The other group who wasn't circumcised wasn't given any of those things. So of course they didn't get STDs, like so-called STDs and all this. Of course they didn't end up with, infection or whatever in their penis.
Nonetheless, it was improperly controlled, like not even close to being controlled.
Nothing. Like there was nothing. It's like a high school student could come up with that study who's never had any idea how to design a clinical research study. I mean, it's that bad, Alec. So fortunately, the United States is the only country in which this was like pretty universal. Like, I don't know, most of my friends, I think all but one of my friends, close friends from high school, are circumcised.
Dude, I learned that when I was playing professional handball in Germany, in the locker room, it was me and one other American and then maybe one other German guy who were circumcised and the rest were uncircumcised. And that was a huge shock to me because I was like, wait a second.
What's going on here?
Right. Yeah. Like I thought I was the norm and that was the abnormal. And what I found very quickly is that no, we were the abnormal ones. And there's one other German guy who was circumcised, but everyone else was completely uncircumcised, fully intact.
So that experience that you're having is now going to be the experience for circumcised men in our country. And the reason is because it has been on the downtrend. Yeah. I've got one of my dearest friends from way back in my medical training. He has let me know, he's like, the good news is where it's a downtrend. And if I can recall, he's German actually. And he wasn't circumcised. So he and I don't agree on a lot of things, trust me. But he's a pediatrician, imagine the types of conversations we have. But we're still really, really good friends. And he said that it's on the downtrend, which is good news. And I think the reason that people typically used to do it is, oh, he's going to match me. The reason that most parents do it is because dad feels like I'm circumcised, I want my son to match me. That's fine. But you also have to recognize that this is a really traumatic experience for a little boy. And if anybody listening has been circumcised or they've circumcised their own son, I don't want you leaving this whipping yourself and feeling bad. I just want us to recognize that this is a trend that we actually can stop right now. Most of us make decisions based on the information that we have, and we just do the very best. And then later we realize, oh my gosh, we saw this with COVID. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. You did, and it's okay. But let's actually think about this. People will say, well, the baby doesn't really feel it. We use lidocaine. We use all that. Some people say that we don't use lidocaine. I've never once heard of anybody doing a circumcision without lidocaine. Let me just be clear about that. But that doesn't really matter because how many times have you had dental work done and they do some lidocaine and then they start drilling or whatever? I haven't had a cavity filled for a long time, but I remember them being like, let me know if it's sensitive. And then and you start to feel that, like it's a pain, man, in your tooth. Like it's unlike any other pain in your body. And you raise your hand and they're like, oh my gosh, maybe we should put some more in. You can feel it. Those listening, you know what that feels like. It like rattles you to the core. A baby can't raise their hand and say, I need more medicine. So even though we have infused a little bit of lidocaine, we don't know how good that block is. And we're basically, we're I don't want to say suppressing them, but we are dissociating them with sugar. So we're asking them to just be still and let us do this thing. We don't know if they're having pain or not. They seem to be okay. And hey, I had it. I don't have any memories of that. Well, hold on. We also live in a society in which men, especially, around the world, it's a big issue. I won't say it's not. But man, do we have an issue with men taking advantage of women. Like goes back to what I worry about with my little girls. Are you going to, like, they're in jujitsu with dad, because I want them to have at least some basic skills to like keep a person from hurting them, raping them, all of that stuff. I mean, this is terrible stuff to think about, but we have a society at large in which men think that they can have sex with wherever they can put their wiener. And that's not all that great. In other words, there's some, there is this, did I say in some ways that's not so great?
No, you said that's not all that great. I'm
okay.
No, that's horrible.
Yeah, that is like, this is a horrible reality in American culture. So we also have depression, we have anxiety, we have a lot of people who have really, really deeply wounded, traumatic stuff that comes up in birth and in ceremony and all this other stuff. Could this also be a part of that? We've talked a lot of things, from childhood vaccines to the way babies come in, to conception, to all of that stuff. Could this be another thing that a little boy goes through that is not necessary, it's not helpful, and it's actually harming? They have found that boys who do undergo circumcision have greater startle responses, they have lower pain thresholds, they have lower thresholds for becoming fussy and crying and seeking safety. And this is all a part of a bigger dialogue around what it's like for a baby to come into the world. If you close your eyes and you imagine a baby coming in a quiet room, even dimly lit like this, versus the craziness in the hospital, it feels a lot different. And the reason is a baby's nervous system develops in the womb. They've got their dorsal vagal, then they develop their sympathetic tone. And you see this change in the baseline of the baby's heart rate. And then later you have the ventral vagal tone develop, but that doesn't fully develop until 6 to 12 months after. The ventral vagal is what you and I greeted each other with. If I came in and I was like looking all huffy puffy and whatnot, that's like sympathetic, like let's fight or flight. But if I came in with my face, my tone down, my hearing changes, my shoulders change when I can activate that ventral vagal, that doesn't happen until later in a baby's life. After that develops, SIDS is not really a question. So SIDS is a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, and it requires co-regulation with mother for the ventral vagal. This is polyvagal theory for anybody who wants more information about it.
You're speaking to SIDS as in sudden infant death syndrome, right?
Yeah. Babies that are taken away from mothers and fathers and put into NICU incubators and whatnot, they're higher risk, partly because some of them are preterm, but also partly because they don't have a safe anchor point. They don't start developing that ventral vagal tone, which helps to establish this, this sort of equilibrium within their autonomic nervous system. So when a baby comes out, we do the vitamin K shot, we do the eye goop, we do the bright lights, we dry them off, we cut the cord, we do the hepatitis B usually comes day one, but it doesn't really matter. That's a part of this whole cascade of things. And all that a baby really needs is to find safety. So whenever people say, delay the cord, put the baby on the chest and leave them alone, that is actually helpful for the life of the child. This is not a luxury. This isn't just a little item that was checked on the birth plan. This is necessary for that child's survival. And then day one, you're also going to chop off a piece of their genitalia, and we're holding them down. This goes back to the way men behave. We're holding the baby down and saying, if I'm bigger and stronger than you, I can take advantage of you however I want. And your mom is not here to save you. So we think about the stuff that's happening on college campuses and all of this. This is shit that unfortunately little boys are now don't even know where this is coming from. It's this rage. I'm not saying this is the only thing.
No, but it makes a lot of sense, man. Like if you haven't healed that and you have that happening in your subconscious, maybe you don't have a direct memory of it. It's still informing how you express.
That's right.
And what you just said there is the exact story of what men who are abusive, who are, the women in our lives are scared to come across. That's exactly how they behave. That's it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of reasons for us to be worried about that. And fortunately, I think actually people are starting to wisen up to this, and we're seeing a downtrend, which I think is really, I feel very hopeful about that. But it's just one of many things that we actually really, really need to address within maternity care and medicine in general. Since
we're on the topic of like interventions during birth and procedures, I would like to talk a little bit more. We did touch on a little bit induction and then C-sections. I just want to ask from your perspective, and I asked Dr. Stu this as well, just interesting to get a little bit more quote unquote anecdotes. First off, I'll ask this. How many home births have you attended at this point? Would you?
It's hard to say. I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as many as I've attended in the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many home births have ended up in C-section versus those that were in the hospital?
I see what you're getting at. I have never once attended a home birth that ended up in a C-section.
And how many hospital births did you attend that ended up in C-section? Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking thousands of births here. Yeah. I haven't attended nearly as many home births. Okay. But if it was, and a part of that is that when people come to me for home birth, I will find a midwife for them because midwives do this better. We're going to talk about midwifery and free birth at the end of this, but I feel like midwives do this better. They do it differently. You're hiring a surgeon to do a home birth. And yes, I'm really, really good at this. And yes, I can do that. And I even attended my best friend's home birth, which was a breech. I think I maybe mentioned that. But typically when I attend births, it's because they're so high risk that midwives won't accept them. And I know what I can do. I can resuscitate a baby. I can do all of that. But we haven't had a C-section yet. We haven't had a transfer. And these are high risk people. These are people that midwives were like, our licensure won't even let us touch this. And they still had vaginal births. Someone with multiple C-sections.
These are people who, if they had birthed in the hospital system, would overwhelmingly be recommended to have a C-section.
Yeah, or at least a really, really challenging induction that may result in a birth. But after you had 2 C-sections, it's hard to convince anybody to do anything for you aside from just scheduling a repeat C-section. So yeah, does that answer your question?
No, that definitely answers my question. Yeah. And then I want to talk about ultrasounds a little bit as well before we move on to midwifery and everything else. Yeah. The ultrasound thing was interesting to me. I mean, I feel like it's just one topic after another. It's like, these are sacred cows. Every time you go to your OBGYN, they do an ultrasound. You get to see the face, you do all of this. But it was also like, I also kind of noticed and people had told me the baby moves out of the way when the ultrasound's there. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then here's what actually did it. I was looking at have you ever heard of cymatics or kymatics? Yeah, dude, absolutely.
Isn't that dope?
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, this is basically, you can get a thin tin plate, put some granules of sand or salt on it and vibrate the plate at different frequencies. And these really cool geometric patterns will form. And there's an infinite number of combinations. 257 versus 258 will give you a different pattern. It's really, really neat. So what that tells us is that these waveforms actually can alter the way that physical matter orients itself relative to itself. You can do this 3-dimensionally with plasma and all kinds of cool things.
Doing water is really cool too.
It's really, really neat stuff. So, I'll just have to trust that people can go look at that. If you watch how those granules move, they don't seem, and they're dumb little grains of salt, right? They don't know where one another's going, but they all find their way to some place as if there's some sort of architect that has this like a mold or something, and they're all finding their way there. Well, then you go to YouTube. So I saw that, and something in my study of Steiner and whatnot prompted me to think about this and think. And I was like, I still don't know where babies come from. And I don't really know how these bodies form. I show the illustrations and whatnot, but I really don't know how the body knows how to do this. Egg and sperm meet. So I went and found a time-lapse video of a zebrafish embryo forming. And it starts with 2 cells and then it starts outwardly doing its thing. And then it folds in on itself and it starts to look even like a human embryo. And then it starts to form into a fish. And I was watching, and because it's so high definition, you can almost see cells moving around one another. And I was like, oh, those cells maybe they are communicating with one another, but they all seem to know where they're going without being told or consciously knowing, I need to go down. What's a down? What's water? It's that whole thing. They're just floating in space as far as I'm concerned, similar to the cells of a human embryo. And they find their way to form an alec, which is mind blowing. But then I actually posted this years ago on Instagram. I was like, look at the video of cymatics and look at zebrafish. I was like, this is the same thing. So if we are able to vibrate a tin plate using a relatively long wave, let's say low frequency sort of output, and get a physical manifestation of that, why couldn't we get that with ultrasound with a developing embryo? The problem, of course, is it's unethical to ask the question and then test your guess, your hypothesis in a human being, because nobody's going to be like, well, let's just see if my baby ends up okay. Go ahead, ultrasound the heck out of me and we'll see. But those probes, what's in an ultrasound probe is a piezoelectric crystal. Crystals are living things. They're biodynamic. They are changing with time. Not like some rocks, but especially quartz and these other things. They're changing.
Like that right there. You can show that on camera.
Yeah, this little guy.
Yeah, like that quartz.
So there's something really magical about crystals. And we have discovered through IBM, and I don't know if you know about the story of IBM and conscious technologies and Vogel cut crystals. Woo! That's a good one. It'll be for another time because I don't want to do the anecdote thing. But crystals are really special. And we discovered years ago that we could use these in motherboards and everything else. Well, they put one in these probes. We run an electric current through it. And because it's a living thing, I like to imagine it's screaming. We're electrocuting the crystal, and the crystal's putting out sound waves. The sound waves then go into and through the tissue of the abdominal wall, through the uterus, and then echoes back. And based on the density, it'll give an image, which is you don't know if that's really what the baby looks like because it isn't really the baby. It's a mock-up of what it would look like if we're just looking at density of tissues. And then we can use that to determine, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Does it have eyes? Does it have fingers? Whatever. Well, because of my investigation into kymatics, and I haven't investigated, it was just like, that sure as heck looks like it could explain how these cells actually know where to go because nobody else knows. Why couldn't that be it? Why couldn't there be a greater field that dictates how these cells are all arranging themselves with regard to one another? And so then that was like, it got me on this path of like, is ultrasound safe at all? Like, should we be doing ultrasound? And what I came to as the punchline, and I'll tell you why I got there, is do it when it's absolutely necessary. And what I mean by that is that if it's going to change your plan, it's going to really matter what the result is, then let's do it. Do it for as short a period of time. Just see the things you need to see and then get out of there. Use the lowest input you can, lowest settings on the ultrasound machine. There's all sorts of settings you can do. These things are pretty marvelous at this point. So there's no data, right? How did I come to that conclusion? I'm never like firm in anything that I, discover in these investigations, but because there's so little data in utero studies, I should say, so little in utero studies in the United States or from the American or the Western European literature, I found a book called 50 Human Studies. Now, this book is a little bit controversial. The author is apparently controversial. His name is Jim West. But he selected a number of studies out of China where they actually did report on what may have happened with this child's long-term health if it was exposed to this much radiation through ultrasound. And they found that some of the structures, including the nervous system, some of the kidney structures, the glomeruli in the kidney are really, really, really sensitive. Some of the neurodevelopmental outcomes, that they actually were associated with the frequency, duration, and intensity of ultrasound. So I am not saying that we're all now screwed because we were ultrasounded while we were inside our moms, or that our babies are all screwed. I sure hope not. But again, this is only an invitation to be curious about this being something that we put on the uterus, the abdomen, every single visit, especially in the first trimester. So for those who are wondering, what would I recommend? I think in the very bare minimum, that formal anatomy ultrasound from head to toe at 18 to 22 weeks is a really nice study because it will show you if there's a part of the brain that's not developing, or there's a huge spinal, like a spina bifida, myelomeningocele or something that can be repaired while the baby's still in the uterus. Like there's some marvelous things that we can do if it's going to be better for the baby. And we won't know if we don't look. But doing this routine ultrasound every couple of weeks in the OB's office, just because you want to see your baby, that might not be the best thing to do because that water heats up the embryology, the early cells during embryogenesis. That could actually be impacted. We just don't know how, why, when, or in what context. It's just a question.
No, everything you said makes so much sense. I've never thought of it like that. Like I've obviously thought about our field once it enters into our mother's womb, like is helping to order, but looking at it compared to cymatics, dude, that
people are going to go and look at zebrafish and cymatics. Look at those videos and tell me that there isn't something that's like dope.
Yeah, just thinking about it, I was like, wow, that is incredible. Let's talk about midwifery now.
Well, midwifery. So what I mentioned was, by the way, we haven't talked about all this stuff on my chest. I realize I'm feeling crinkly and itchy. Heidi Scheck, I told her I would plug her. She listens to your podcast and loves you.
Oh, awesome.
If you or anybody here in Austin needs a tattoo, Heidi Scheck's your lady. She's
does she use 30 minutes away. Good ink?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, she's pretty health conscious. She works at Onnit and everything. So she's amazing. Yeah, if anybody does, she does. Yeah. But she's really rad. So Heidi, I gave you a shout out. I wanted to give you that. But one thing I didn't mention is my whole tattoo motif is the material and the spiritual, and then there's the Christ principle in the center is a big firehawk.
That's cool.
So it's Ahriman and Lucifer in this Christ principle in the center. So this is like steeped in everything.
So you are Steiner embodied in a tattoo.
I use it to teach sometimes, to lift up my shirt.
Really?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, we've got these two sides and you're in the center. You're the cosmic antenna.
That's cool.
Feet on the ground. breathe, wiggle your toes.
Without context, like showing up to like one of your first lessons or whatever, like teaching, and like that's what's going on. Like, whoa, this is.
I'm wearing like a belly shirt.
I thought this guy was an OBGYN.
Crop top.
Where's his stethoscope?
Where's his stethoscope? He's just shirtless. I can see his nipples. Reese is over there like, what the heck?
No, Reese.
So midwives are important. I think another punchline is I think we need to get back to a time where midwives actually are the default way of going about prenatal care and childbirth support. They have a very, very much more patient-centered approach whereby informed consent, autonomy, and the comfort and goals of the family come first and foremost. If I walk into I even came in here and I took my shoes off. Like when you walk into a place that isn't your home, you can wear your shoes on your couch or whatever if you want. When you come into somebody else's home, you're on their turf and they make the rules. So it's a very, very different experience, as you know.
Hey, y'all. I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at The Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model, whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled. We have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well. So my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there.
There's something about that. That's a really good point. I can't believe I've never really thought about it like that too. Like obviously the environment is much better, but when it comes to like the hierarchy of authority, when you are stepping foot onto someone else's turf versus them having to step foot into your turf, that completely changes things.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple little frame shift. Like now, I'm riding in your car versus you riding in my car. It's very, very simple. But traditionally, midwifery has also just circled around like developing a really deep connection to the person you're here to care for. And it wasn't a profession for since like time immemorial. At one point, it was just women cared for women because women gave birth and I can help you have a baby. I've had a baby. And then somebody's been involved in 30 years of helping other women have babies. And now she would be what we would call a midwife. What was their job? Well, their job was really just to keep people from getting in the way. There wasn't a lot of sophistication. There was, some herbs here and there. I would say that like up until about the early 20th century, this is really how things went. And there was this like, a systemic class struggle during feudal times when most people are poor, you just go and you eat what you can get. You use herbs because there's no modern medicine. There's no vaccines. There's no x-rays. You just do what you can. And so communities were taking care of one another. And in the feudal times, there was like a true 1%. And then everybody else was just trying to get by. So this dates all the way back to ancient Sumer. What's interesting is during that like 13th to 17th century, when we had the witch trials, there was a lot of self-proclaimed surgeons who were a part of the decision around whether a person was practicing witchcraft or medicine. And there was no medicine. Like they're still babbling about humors and stuff, I mean, let me reframe that actually. There may be more to the humors theory than meets the eye, but my point is that they had no reason, they had no context for what was witchcraft and medicine. It was literally them just giving a thumbs up, thumbs down gladiator style. So a woman could be accused of practicing witchcraft for having an abnormal birthmark, or looking at somebody funny, or not accepting a man's advances, or having tinctures like all of us take every single day, thanks to the integrative health community, herbs, all of this stuff. So it was during that time that midwives actually were scorned. I mean, if you were a midwife, you probably had some herbal something somewhere, and all somebody had to do was say, she's a witch, right? That takes us up to like the 17th, 18th centuries. And around the 1800s, there was an ongoing movement of this sort of guild of people trying to develop a profession around medicine. I mentioned René Descartes, and some of the philosophers at the time actually helped through their convincing the church, which had kind of a stranglehold on everything at the time, that, hey, the body's just a body. The soul is different. It's a really, really nice, probably colorful poetry back then. But what it did for medicine was now we can cut in and start understanding this physiology. That's great. But the physicians at the time, and now the surgeons, were always trying to get the upper hand on everybody else, right? So is all the way up into like the 1800s, like all the way back, there was something called the popular health movement. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
It's really interesting. It's literally like Men's Health magazine, but there was Popular Health magazine. It was interesting. I mean, that was like the revival of it in the 20th century, but it was really just like, hey, how do you take care of yourself at home? Like getting movement in this and that. We're talking 1800s, Alex. So there were people that were like, hey, like we need to take care of, what we eat and this and that. Like that dates way back, and it was super, super popular. And the people that started this with like the lay healers, they started picking up on patterns, and you can use this tincture and and that tincture. And really they were like the heart and soul of this whole movement. But there was this group of people who didn't have a way of calling themselves professional doctors, or they weren't professors of medicine or whatever, but they had started using surgical tools, and they started experimenting with this, and they called themselves the regulars. And the treatments of these regulars were still pretty barbaric. It's like all the bloodletting and the leeches and, mercury containing laxatives and opium and all this stuff. Oftentimes they were as fatal as they were helpful. So this popular health movement was like, that's great. If you have to go to those guys, yikes, that's going to be a problem. So the regular doctors, like the practice of medicine wasn't really a thing. And these lay practitioners were using they were using diet, they were hand holding in birth, and they weren't killing people, which is like the biggest win, right? So these regular doctors, they really started trying to get sneaky and figure out how could we take this over? I mean, these are the midwives really that we're talking about. The lay healers, midwives, it wasn't even a thing. You just were a woman having a baby and there's an elder in the community. These regular doctors were, of course, part of the aristocracy, the upper class, the courts and this and that. So they started passing laws in the 1830s and making this the only way to do this legally. It's continued on today. If you're giving health advice, you might be, scorned for practicing medicine without a license. The popularity of this health movement was kind of it was confronting, let's just say. And these self-proclaimed physicians and surgeons needed a way out. There was a gentleman, physician named Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. He criticized this movement as nature trusting heresy, which I think is a really lovely little t-shirt or something we should make. And he helped form what became the American Medical Association. So there's a long history with this.
That's hilarious. And that has now evolved into, instead of saying a nature trusting heresy, you're a pseudoscientific quack.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a change in language. And then 50 years later or so, you've heard of the Flexner Report. This is where we had, the Carnegies and Rockefellers just kind of went across the country, hired this guy, Abraham Flexner, to give a grading system, who was most closely aligned with the German style of medical education. And those schools are going to get financed and the others aren't. So this was thought maybe to be the way to get midwives out, but it actually just impacted the osteopaths and the chiropractors and the Chinese medicine practitioners and whatnot. So after this report came out, there was this movement, slowly, gradual movement, whereby people started going into the hospitals. But women and babies were doing worse there. And some actually at the time were attributing the better outcomes to the fact that midwives were staying out of the way, letting nature take its course. So this is the same reason that midwives are still practicing today. And the regulars still couldn't compete. So now hospitals have the births. Physicians have no idea what they're doing with childbirth because these midwives have done this for thousands of years. They're passing it down through a lineage-based form of education. There's the schooling. You don't need to go to school. You do need an education, but it's not going to be through a compulsory curriculum in some school program. So a lot of these regular physicians are still talking about humor theory and whatnot, and a group of elite regulars. They called themselves regular physicians because this was predates what we call modern medicine. They went over to Germany and started learning about germ theory and antibiotics, which was happening at this time. And remember, like at this time, we have dead bodies in the streets. We have like no idea about hygiene, and
people are drinking poop water.
Yeah, like if I go to the bathroom and I have poop on my fingers and I lick them after I, and go have some pizza, like I am probably not going to feel very well, and maybe I get an infection, right? Or if I go and do a C-section and I got like this dirty scalpel, like maybe not a great idea. It was just laying in the dumpster over there, right? So they brought all this back and they realized, oh my gosh, we wash hands and we do this type of stuff and we're going to see improved outcomes, and it did. It actually was a demonstrable difference. And this was probably, I would say that was probably like what sealed it, but then it was further fueled by this mischaracterization of midwives as lazy, uneducated, kind of like helpless, like doofuses, that like they don't have anything better to do. They're just going to do this stuff. And you even see them kind of depicted as like the old hag, the old witch, the old maid, and that of course is not true. These were highly trained, highly skilled professionals without having a professionalization. They had done this, had taught, by grandma. She was taught by her mother, etc. And what we now have is a full professionalization and licensure system, which has led to a dilution of midwifery in most regards, not everybody, not all midwives, but in most regards to a diluted version of obstetrics, whereby death is the ultimate enemy here. Like that there is nothing worse than a baby or mom dying. And therefore we need to use all of the technology, all the lab values, and all the interventions possible to keep that bad thing from happening without recognizing, whether your licensure tells you to do this or not, without recognizing that a lot of those interventions lead to the need for the heroics down the line. So there's a lot of controversy here, and I work with midwives now in 22 states, and I get to see what state by state they're doing. It's different in every state. Some midwives who have been doing this for a very long time, who are doing things that their licensure wouldn't allow them to do, just don't become licensed and they practice underground. That's unfortunately what we're left with. And the biggest issue with that is that if somebody, like a midwife, is attending to a birth and they know that the hospital is not going to be happy with them doing this because it was a breech or it was a prior C-section or God knows what, they know that they could be reported to the medical board. So they end up delaying their transfer. There's no integration. They delay the transfer to the hospital. And that's actually where I see the bad outcomes because of the delay, or they delay and the team at receiving them delays and doesn't even get a sign out, doesn't know what happened. And so they're just, piddling around. And meanwhile, there's an emergency here on their hands. So what would ideally happen is you have somebody like me at the hospital who says, bring them right in. Let's go. Like I'm here, I'm waiting. I got my gloves on. Yeah. Instead, midwives are afraid because they've been scorned since the witch hunts. Like this is not a new story.
Yeah. Is that why a lot of midwives have formed close relationship with doctors in various like ERs? Because I see that pretty commonly amongst midwives.
I think that's always a goal. I think midwives always want to have some relationship with a local hospital. I mean, that's ideally what you have happen. But then again, it's like, well, I don't want to ruin my relationship with that doctor. So I'm just going to go in. I don't want to delay anymore. And sometimes it might just be, we need to be a little bit more patient or try something different instead of going into the hospital because, your waters have been open for 24 hours. I'm worried about being judged by those doctors. There really should be oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought her in. Tell me the story. Yeah. And that's not usually what's happening with doctors. So when the midwives listening, when you find that midwife who has a relationship with a doctor, for the midwives listening, if you have that relationship with your doctor, I see you. Like that is really, really valuable. And we need more OBGYNs especially to step up and recognize that midwives are actually very, very good at this. And they're actually better in some ways than you are at allowing birth to unfold. I don't really like that word, but permitting birth to happen in the natural way that it would unfold otherwise.
I talked with Stu about this too. It's like the problem is the overwhelming majority of OBGYNs who've never personally attended a home birth have a perception of home birth that is, let's just say like it is, exclusively based in those women who have attempted a home birth that end up in a hospital. So their perception is colored by like, oh, these damn home birthers, this is horrible. So
they don't hear about all the great stories.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. Are those counted in the birth statistics? That's another thing. I forgot to mention that with Stu. It's like when we're talking about outcomes, even like infant mortality rates across the world, how much are home birth statistics incorporated in that? Almost none. Exactly. And like when we do comparisons of home births versus hospital births, like luckily we have people like you and the variety of midwives and doulas that are out there. I think Ayla, if you ever listen to this, I might be incorrect on this, but if I remember correctly, Ayla said that she knows a midwife who's attended over 1,000 home births, and only 8 of those 1,000 ended up in C-section. Now, I'd imagine that that's like a number that might not reflect reality necessarily. Like, I would say that that's incredibly low. That being said, it lends credence to what you've described with your personal anecdotal experience, what Dr. Stu described, what other midwives who I've talked to described, that the incidence of C-sections and overall interventions and the so-called necessity of these interventions is much, 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 much lower. And I just wonder about the overall health outcomes. And then, of course, the infant mortality outcomes, home birth relative to hospital birth. And Dr. Stu brought up a really good point too. Sorry, I'm almost done with my ranting here, that when a home birth goes bad, the home birth and whoever is overseeing the home birth or the mother is to blame. When a hospital birth goes bad, again, the mother is to blame, or the process of birth is to blame. The hospital doesn't have any liability. It's just like, oh, this just happens sometimes.
Yeah. There's a lack of accountability there. And I would really encourage any OBGYN or neonatologist to consider how many babies in your NICU came through a unnecessary induction, where the baby's pushed too hard to be evacuated from their little amniotic universe too soon. And now they're in your NICU for no clear reason at all. You can say, hey, babies end up in the NICU. Sometimes we have this happen. You can say all that, but like, what does your experience actually tell you? If you go in there, so all the babies that end up transferring to the hospital, like home birth moms, they get tired, they need an epidural, whatever, they can go to the hospital. There's probably no greater percentage of those babies ending up in the NICU than otherwise, but you don't actually even see all the babies that don't end up in the hospital. So, and then we have people like my wife and I, we didn't register the baby until later. So you don't even know that we had a home birth until we tell you and we want to get a passport or a national ID or, whatever, a different conversation that we could get into. But
I actually interviewed someone on that topic. So I'll link it in the show notes, my episode with Veda Ray.
That doesn't get tabulated. So, my point is that the NICU is not full of, a bunch of births that were poorly managed by, these incompetent home birth midwives. Most of those babies were managed by your own staff down the hall in the maternity unit who's doing unnecessary things to babies, or to mothers, I should say, in the childbirth experience. The question would be, what if we did things more like a midwife in the hospital? Of course, we would have better outcomes, but it's not possible to even create a semblance of a home birth in the hospital. You'd have to redesign a hospital completely. It just isn't the thing. So, there's since we're on that topic of midwives, people are like, well, don't you want to know if the baby's doing well? We have a technology called continuous fetal monitoring, right? Fetal heart rate monitoring, which was introduced as a technology in the 40s or 50s and became nearly universal by like 2000. There's a whole book on this by Jacqueline Wolfe. It's called something about American C-section or something like that. She didn't realize how much she was going to have to know about continuous fetal heart rate monitoring. But this monitoring was meant to decrease cerebral palsy rates, which is basically a consequence of an anoxic brain injury. And so when it was introduced, we were thinking, oh, we'll have less babies with cerebral palsy in the NICU. Not the case. That rate actually hasn't changed at all. What has changed is we've had C-section rates go through the roof since this has become universal. So then the question is it the continuous fetal heart rate monitoring that has led to the more C-sections, or is there something else? It's probably multiple factors, but it's an undeniable association when you see how they plot together. So why are we still doing continuous fetal heart rate monitoring? And if you're not doing that at home, is that actually a benefit to you being at home? There are some babies that have a really, really ugly tracing that do fine after a C-section. They look like a perfect baby. Like, what were we worried about? Right. Other babies have a totally happy looking tracing and they're crunked out in the NICU on a ventilator. So we have this technology that hasn't been validated. And if you got me, Stu, and 98 other OBGYNs in a room and asked us to interpret a bunch of tracings, we'd all have a different opinion. Wow. It's highly subjective. So we have this technology that's universal. Every single woman who goes in, even if they pop it on and take it off, it has not been validated. And it's not that useful unless there's very specific things that I see that I'm like, oh boy, that's something I'm worried about. Yeah. It's a big difference between the practices.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, Dr. Stu is talking about like how most birth recommendations in terms of interventions and like the so-called necessity of interventions is based in level 3 evidence. So it's really just like based in opinion. It's literally just based in opinion.
Consensus opinion means we don't have any data. Yeah. So in the paucity of data, we get a bunch of old folks together and ask them what they think.
Man.
Which is how most of our medicine works. Yeah.
So a question, this is going to kind of lead us into the home birth, the free birth conversation is the pros and cons of licensure when it comes to midwifery. I just love to hear your take on that. I know that's a big question.
Let me start by saying that my barber during COVID was not allowed to practice barbering, whatever that's called, in his home because the barber board, not the medical board, the barber board would take away his license if he were to be cutting hair outside of an accredited facility, also called a barber shop.
That's insane.
Do we need to go further?
It's insane.
And Frankie, if you're listening, hey Frankie, he's my buddy. He was like, yeah, man, I can't cut hair anymore, but you could come over and like have a coffee and my scissors might make you look a little better.
That's insane, man.
Yeah. So licensure says that Frankie the barber can cut hair.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you need a license to know how to drive a car? No, it's a permission slip to drive a car. You could have driven all over the world, but you can't drive in the United States unless you have a license from whatever state. So this idea of licensure was meant to impress upon the consumer that this person is experienced and has done the due diligence in becoming whatever it is.
They've received the necessary education and experience.
Yeah, they've had the apprenticeship. They've had like whatever it takes, and there's some guilds like carpentry and whatnot that still kind of work on an apprenticeship-based model, but there's very, very few of those anymore. Even electricians, it's pretty formalized education now. When my dad, who was an HVAC guy, when he was into this, he would go to trade school and then go and work with an HVAC guy for years until he was like, you're good, you can do this. And he gives you like the badge, little gold star, and then you can go and practice or work. Medicine is very similar. In some ways, you want surgeons to like have the credentials to be doing surgery, not just throw up a shingle and say I can do brain surgery or C-sections for that matter. I haven't done a C-section in 7 years. I'm not going to say I can do C-sections. I know the steps, but I haven't done it. So I'm not going to hang my shingle for that. Midwifery is interesting because, like I said, midwives traditionally, and there's a term there, traditional midwifery was a lineage-based, apprenticeship-based means by which you garner the skills and the confidence to attend birth, know how to manage emergencies. An apprentice is somebody who hangs out with an expert, so to speak, and gets to know how to do it on the job. And then when you're ready to fly, you jump out of the nest. We don't really have that in midwifery anymore. There is a way to do that, but it's not very common. It's actually quite radical to do that. The way to do it now is to go through the certification process and then get a license. And the license, anytime you hear the word license, it means it's a permission slip to do something. So I cannot operate in the private, which you know, and what maybe your listeners know about. I can't actually do that through a private contract association and whatnot because I'm practicing under the surveillance, the permission by 22 of the United States. I can do other private things in my life, which I do, like irrevocable trust. I can do all kinds of cool stuff with that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the way that I make an income as a physician is through a license. Does that license mean that I'm safe to practice? Absolutely not. I may have never done anything since I graduated from my first year of residency. That's how you get licensure. And I have no skills at all, but I could, in theory, hang a shingle and say, I'm licensed to do C-sections. Is that the right thing to do? No, but I'm an ethical man. And I know that that's not safe. A midwife could, in theory, hang a shingle without doing any training. But they never used to be professional. They used to be traditional, and there was this apprenticeship model. So if you were to go through that apprenticeship model and you attend 3,000 births, I'm going to trust you way more than a licensed professional midwife who just finished their training. You know what you're doing. You have demonstrated that. But licensure is meant to bridge that gap of the uncertainty around what a person's capable of doing. In some states, licensure has made it possible for midwives to do what they do without being hunted as witches, which is happening in a lot of states. In this very state, it's actually quite complicated. But if you're practicing—
in Texas.
Yeah. It's legal to do it, but—
a lot of restrictions.
There's a lot of restrictions. Yeah. In every state, California, a lot of restrictions. You can't attend breech. So that person's going to go to the hospital and get a C-section. By you prohibiting a midwife who's done hundreds of breeches, more than OBs, from attending to this woman who has a butt-down baby and doesn't consent to C-section, by the way, by forcing her to withdraw her care, have the lady go into the hospital, you're basically condemning her to a C-section, which should be a problem. So licensure in some ways does say that this person has done some training. It does not mean that they're necessarily safe. And some of those restrictions actually become prohibitive to you practicing autonomously. On the other hand, it does kind of shore up in some regards this tendency for people to think that they're better than they are. The Dunning-Kruger effect is in full effect everywhere in the world. I'm sure you know what that is. And that is, midwives aren't immune to that. You go and take a couple months of a workshop, like from certain agencies talking about free birth, and now you say, I'm a birth worker or a birth keeper, and then a baby dies on your hands, even though you were told you had all the skills, like you went to the wrong people for your training, and you actually advertised falsely that you have the experience and skill set in order to help get this family through this experience. So I think that in general, I think licensure has done some good, and I think it has done some bad. I think in some states, like I said, where it would otherwise be illegal to practice, it has made it possible, but it's on their terms. And those terms are going to be set forth typically as a mirror for what the medical board would expect of midwives. So it is not it's a double-edged sword, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me too, as a philosophical, like voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist. Like, I just think government putting its hands into anything it ends up poisoning
ends
the well.
Up poisoning it. Yeah.
Every single time.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because it has a strong correlation with education and experience at this juncture in history, it's like there's got to be something. And I think the apprenticeship model makes a lot of sense. And it's like, how do we go about doing that in the private? Is that even possible to fully do in the private? I don't know. Like, I hope someone can come up with a creative solution. I'm sure there's midwives looking into it, because government getting its hand in anything is never good, in my opinion. So
I think that people that are pursuing this work, I think there needs to be a little bit of humility as to like, this is not a medical procedure. If it was a procedure, I could give you the instructions and you just follow the instructions. It's not how it works. It's a real art. And it's something that as an OB-GYN, it's like, you've been in the military. Like, if you're under, I don't know if you've ever been under gunfire.
Thank God, no. Never been in combat. But,
so if you were in combat.
I've simulated it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, even if you've never played paintball and you've heard paintballs hurt, it feels like, oh my God, this is going to hurt me. And I better cover my neck, because I've seen people get bruises. If you go and play paintball and you've never been under gunfire, it feels almost like a real thing. And it's scary. Similar with surgery. Like, when you've had a person bleeding out in front of you and you need to fix it, everything else quiets down and you can now operate. That is a part of your rigorous training as an OB-GYN. It's hard, it's terrible, it's 100 hours a week, exhausting, burnout, adrenal fatigue, all the words combined. But you emerge and you have a skill set that is extremely well tuned. To say, oh, I did a year of, I watched some videos online and had some cool Q&A conversations and now I'm a birth worker. That is okay. But let's be very clear with how experienced you are. Might be a good time to get into the free birth stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, the free birth thing, let me start by saying, if I was able to have babies, I'd probably have a free birth, because there's a real power in this. There's like, in a world in which we see death as the enemy, and we're so afraid of facing mortality for all the reasons we've described. When a person says, you know what, I understand that there's consequences and I'm willing to take that risk, that is a real act of like civil disobedience. That is so disruptive. It's as disruptive as making yourself so healthy that you don't even need to use your health insurance, or you don't even need to pay your premiums anymore, right? It's one of those things where it's like, wow, in a world where people expect you to be afraid and you're conditioned to be afraid of everything and outsource your power everywhere, you're saying, I'm willing to take the chance, because I just believe that this is going to work. And then accepting the outcomes of that decision, even if your baby dies. That to me is a tremendous, it is like a type of courage that we just don't see anymore in the world. And I have met families who have done this and they say, I made my choice. I'm going to sit with my decision. And I feel like my baby just wasn't meant to come in the world in this way. And they died. And that's for me to grieve. But at least it was my decision. So if there is a possibility that something bad will happen, because there's no guarantee for everything we've talked about, there's no guarantee a baby's going to get through and come into this world. You're not guaranteed to have a baby in your arms because you got a positive pregnancy test. If there is at least some chance that something bad will happen, it sure as heck would feel better if that bad thing happened after you made decisions that felt intuitively right for you, versus you being coerced to do something that definitely was a no, but you just said yes anyways. And this is where free birth becomes very complex and nuanced. What most people think I'm probably going to do is I'm going to start mentioning names and organizations that have done some harm. I think people can find that out on their own. I'm not going to name anybody because I don't have to. But at the start of this idea of free birth, which for those who don't know, I'm not going to have any medical professionals. I'm not going to have any checkups, no ultrasounds, no blood work. When I go into labor, I'm going to have a baby or not. That's That's what free birth is. There is a sort of a trend in doing this because, and in some regards, people don't like what's being offered in the system. And they've also been conditioned to believe that midwives, for the reasons I've described, are oftentimes just diluted obstetricians. So if you really want to do this without intervention, you might have to do it alone. It's not true, but that's what people are sort of conditioned to believe nowadays. And then some women just are like really courageous and like they have a very different worldview and experience with life, death, birth, and everything in between. And to both of those camps, I say, okay, I see you. Some people have the impression that people only have a free birth because they had something traumatic happen in the hospital. That's not true. But it is sometimes the case where I can't find a woman to attend my vaginal breech birth. They won't offer me vaginal breech in the hospital, so I'm going to do this alone. That is also a thing. So you can see how complex this is. And if we wanted to take each of those archetypes and unpack it, we could. We don't have to. There is just this unfortunate tendency for the obstetrics model to be boiled down into all the things we talk about, which is a nice review. If you can measure it, if you can measure it, it's important. If you can't measure it, it's of secondary importance at best. No OBGYN is going to say that, I don't like that my patient, was upset with her birth. Like they're going to say, I'm sorry that it was upset, but hey, at least we had a healthy mom, healthy baby. Right? It's of secondary importance. One other tenet, pregnancy is a disease except on rare occasions. That's where risk stratification comes in. I'm sure Dr. Stu talked about that. That's a big one for us. Mother and baby require a bunch of stuff immediately after birth to keep the baby safe. If you don't get that stuff, your baby's going to die of syphilis. Or not syphilis, but it could be syphilis. It could be gonorrhea.
Whatever
it could be
throw you with fear.
Yeah, right. Bleeding in the brain. It could be any of those things. Right. These are super low risks. But if you don't get all this stuff, including a circumcision and hepatitis B and the whole vaccine schedule, you're a bad mother and we're going to call CPS on you, right? That's Child Protective Services. Avoiding death is the only goal in this obstetrics model. The way that a baby is conceived in birth has no bearing on their long-term well-being. I think we've talked about that enough. And hospitals are the safest way to have a baby, but there is a movement towards more home birth in the care of a certified midwife, usually licensed. And that's the only acceptable out-of-hospital birth experience. Okay. So with all of these boons of the expensive hospital system, why would anybody want to forego care altogether? And that's where we really can wrap up this conversation. I think that we've been conditioned to believe that safety is just, healthy mom, healthy baby, meaning a living mom and healthy baby leave the hospital afterwards, which is already a super low bar. But what if I go into, triage and you and Kylie are in there and you're like, hey doc, we're here. I think we're in labor. Like, okay, well, I'm Dr. Riley. Let me just check to see where you're at. And Kylie says, no. I was like, well, let me just check. I gotta, and the nurse grabs one leg and she's like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, why don't you hold this leg? And I put the glove on and I put the lube on and I just shove my hand in and she's saying, no. And she actually starts pulling back and I ask you to hold her down, like hold her. And then I go in and I force myself inside of a person. I shouldn't have used Kylie. I'm sorry for doing that.
No, well, yeah. But it illustrates the point.
Yeah, I forced myself inside of a person. And now they're left actually being traumatized from the vaginal exam that wasn't helpful anyways in most regards. Check on the monitor. If the baby looks okay, there's no need to do a vaginal exam. You're not going to find a cord prolapse or anything people throw at me when I say this. Routine vaginal exams are absolutely useless in childbirth unless it's going to change your management. So if I go in there and I just say, it's going to check on the baby, I'm lying to you. And I'm actually now compelling some other people to be complicit in what some women will describe as violence or rape. Right. And this is not good. Like this is a really, really big problem, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
A problem in obstetrics.
In the obstetrics model, yeah.
Wow.
So because we've conditioned people to believe that safety in the hospital means living mom, living baby, we don't know what you're going to get. And you do have a bill of rights, patient bill of rights in every hospital, but you don't know what you're going to get. So it's reasonable, I think, for people to be like, shit, I was there with my sister and it didn't go very well, or my aunt or whatever. We also have this cascade of interventions that we've talked about that actually leads to the heroics of obstetrics. Most of the time we don't need those things like out of the blue. It's usually something we've done that has actually tried to move this. We because midwives are nature trusting heretics, we want to intervene in some way, and we want to hijack that and think about it as a series of parts and chemical reactions. So thank goodness the doctor was there. Right? And a lot of women hear this and they're like, oof, not really sure what's going to happen. I've already mentioned that world can be naturally dangerous for women. I do think perinatal psychology is a space worth exploring that I'm working on, which says that the way that babies come into the world really matters, which we've already talked about. The way the babies are conceived really matters. And then lastly, we treat the death of a baby, which I think is going to be inevitable sometimes because we're mortal human beings, but we treat it as a failure of medical sciences every single time. And some people, believe it or not, are actually willing to accept that if my baby wasn't trying to come through, then we're not going to cut my belly open and also hurt me so that my baby can be alive in this world. And that's really hard for OBGYNs to hear because we took an oath to do no harm. But you are also harming the woman in the name of saving the baby, so to speak. So whenever somebody says, if I don't do your C-section right now, your baby will die, that woman, as long as she's of sound mind, has the right to say, I refuse C-section, even if the baby dies. And if the baby dies, we then support her. But we never actually get around to supporting her. We actually just start blaming her and making her feel bad and shame for that decision. If an OBGYN has a hard time honoring autonomy in a woman's reproductive rights, whether it's about abortion or birth control or C-section or whatever else, they need to get therapy. Like, get a new profession because you're in the wrong job. You're doing it wrong. You have to honor their autonomy. And if it goes for abortion, if you support a woman's right to, birth control, abortion and all that, you also have to support their decision to have a vaginal birth. And to decline C-section.
That's interesting, like the hypocrisy there. I've never considered it that way. It's a lot of hypocrisy,
yeah. And both right and left wing hate me for that one. So I think that, I have this deep admiration for women who decide to have a free birth because it's extraordinary nowadays when we're so afraid of death. All the anti-aging stuff that we've talked about, like Brian Johnson, like we're so afraid of the fact that we have to die. I see it as a privilege of dying someday. Thank God we got to do this together. We got to meet in this way. Like what an awesome ride it was. And if we get to do it again, that's great. But I'm here to experience life and live life, not just avoid death. So that's the first part of that. And then we get into people that I believe are taking advantage of all of the stuff that people are saying about what's going on in hospitals. And I think women are seeking an alternative. And I think midwives, in many regards, do offer a great alternative, which is why I want that to become the default mode of prenatal care. It's there, and if you risk out for some probably really good reason you would risk out, you would go to the obstetricians, the surgeons. This is how it is in a lot of places in Europe still. Because we know that there is this alternative and that we need an alternative, but anybody who's within the system, this gets into the anarcho part of it, anybody within the system is reflecting some degree of control and intervention. Why don't we just push all of that aside? And let's usher in a new way of doing this, which of course is the free birth thing. The problem is that for me to say, hey, I think free birth is not an unreasonable option for you because I've got $500,000 in medical school debt and 15 years experience doing this. And I know from my own experience and what the literature says that there are these factors to consider. And if you consider these risks and these benefits and these alternatives, and you then make a sound decision to do it that way, and you're willing to accept the responsibilities of your decisions because I have told you everything I possibly can, including my own recommendations or what I would do if I was in your position. And you then say, you know what? You're a professional. You've done the time. You've put in the time to know this craft, this art. And you really have my best interests at heart. Yeah. Like I know you don't want me to have a C-section and I know you don't want those things for me. And if you're telling me that I'm okay doing this, I trust you. I've developed this trust. I have the chops to do this type of counseling, and you accept that decision. That's very different from somebody who hasn't attended any births, maybe a couple, and somebody who says publicly, well, I don't even bring any gear to the births because you don't need it. It's all silly. It's arrogant, and it's actually leading to quite a bit of harm, especially to the midwifery model of care. And that is why I have to speak about it. Because to say that it's better to have an out-of-hospital birth is one thing. To say that we should be casting midwives into that same pile, which is just a continuation of the witch hunts to begin with. And to do that without having any lived experience of your own that could actually support what you're saying to people, like laughing about the dangers of ultrasounds or this and that. Have you actually read? Have you actually done an ultrasound? Have you ever held or seen an ultrasound? Like, I'm with you, but you can't just throw information around and see what sticks. And then use ad hominem attacks, which a lot of people use online now, to make other people who actually are experienced, who actually have some degree of caution around their counseling. Like, hey, I think it's reasonable, but I'm really concerned about this thing. You know what? Thanks, doc. I appreciate it. I'm still going to do it this way. That's your decision. But I'm telling you that there's a possibility here that something might go wrong. To then cast stones at those people, maybe even people like me and Dr. Stu, because we're a part of the system, even though we are trying to actively change the system, it's very easy to cast us in a shadow, in a pall,
But the thing is, you also oppose the system.
I know.
You know what I mean?
That's the point. And most midwives oppose the system.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Right.
So when the free birth movements at large are actually talking down about midwives, they're actually shooting themselves in the feet. Because what happens then is people have free births and they say that out of hospital birth, there's another death out of hospital, another death out of hospital. And that baby may have died anyways. That's totally fine. That's okay. I accept that. But they did that. They made that decision based on information given to somebody who had no right to be counseling in that way. That's where we actually have we have a philosophical dilemma there. We have a really big problem there. So again, I know I'm being like a little tongue in cheek here, and I think people know what I'm talking about. But as we have people who don't want to do the work and they actually think they know more than they actually know, the Dunning-Kruger effect, we have people who are advertising themselves as providing birth work services and this and that, but they actually haven't attended that many births. So for those of you out there who are looking to do something a little off the beaten path, it's okay to ask, how many births have you attended? You know, if somebody came to me and I was like, this is my first C-section, you might be like, do you want to maybe apprentice with a guy who's done 5,000 of them before you offer that? And it's also okay to ask, what have you done when there's been an emergency? If they say, we don't have emergencies, run the other way. Because it's a numbers game. Eventually there will be something crazy that happens and you need to put your skills to use. And if you don't have any skills, of course you want to bypass it. You want to throw stones at people that actually do have the skills, who've actually put in the time. And that's where we have to do some more work in this. This has been a prickly one.
Yeah, I really appreciate that nuanced take on it too. It's like you acknowledge, just to summarize, you acknowledge that very clearly, we've been talking about that this whole time, that the system and the way hospital births are done is just overwhelmingly incorrect. Like pathologizing birth versus understanding, and it's not physiological birth, according to you, which I totally agree with. Just understanding the beauty and the art of birth when left alone for the woman to do exactly what she was biologically designed to do in that process that nature and God, whatever you want to call it, oversee, right? And also that there is some problems with licensure. There is some very clear problems with licensure, and we need to figure out a new way to properly educate and give experience to women that wish to be midwives. Something needs to change there. And hopefully there will be some solutions that emerge. And they're understandably, because people have become so jaded with the mainstream paradigm, the pendulum sort of has swung the other way, where it's like, all right, I wholesale reject every bit of it, and now I'm going to do it this way. And there's some nuance there because there's empowering aspects to it, but then there's also wrapped up in that empowerment sometimes a lot of, as you said, throwing stones at people who are trying to do their best to also point out the flaws in the system and do it a different way, that have, let's set aside the licensure piece, that have the experience of attending birth with education, understanding the problems with education, but also understanding the new way of doing birth, or the new yet ancient way of doing birth, let's put it. Would you say that that's a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And if I could add one thing to that, I think people always, people like us, we think well, the market kind of works this out. The market can't work itself out in time for tragedy to be averted, disaster to be averted. So in this regard, you might pay a lot of money to be a part of a community where people or women are supporting one another, which sounds beautiful, but some of that advice ends up leading to decisions that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have made had you known otherwise. And that's hard for the market to work itself out until the legal system gets involved and starts, stepping in and saying, you guys are actually you're not advertising something that's actually, it's not a sound product. You're calling yourself this thing without being a licensed person in that thing. And while I don't like licensure, that actually does kind of rectify that. This is why we have licensure. But because they're kind of like us, people are like us, they want to work in the private. They want to kind of push back on the system. I hate this system. Fuck the government. I hate all of it. And I can't just go around that and just say, well, you know what? I'm just going to call myself a neurosurgeon. You just can't do that because people are going to get hurt. But I have ethical boundaries, like not performing C-sections any longer. And I think that free birth itself is not the problem. It's when people start advertising, hey, we're going to get you certified in something else that's better than midwifery. It's better than obstetrics. We've transcended those defunct, archaic models. It's built on like a faulty foundation. And that's where families then end up getting hurt. And the biggest problem is they've invested a lot of money into this path of having community around having their free birth and whatnot. And then when something bad goes wrong, what do? They blame the mom, which is no different from the allopathic model. Steeped in materialism. Oh, you didn't eat the right food, or you didn't do this. You didn't trust birth enough. Like, give me a break. And these people come my way. This is how I know. And I also have to speak to this because my program is called Born Free Method. So people are like, is it for free birth? And it's like, nope.
Not necessarily.
Not exactly.
Yeah.
We're born free. We were born free. And then we put shackles on throughout our life in these various ways, in the mind and the body, and through licensure, through, outsourcing our power, et cetera.
So a new way of doing things ideally would be that we go back to this apprenticeship model that has nothing whatsoever to do with any government licensure. And you just ask someone like, oh, you're a birth educator that I want around for my birth. Yeah. Or maybe I don't even want someone around at my birth, but I'm going to learn from someone who has attended hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of births. And I'm going to learn from them if I want to go free birth.
Yeah. Why didn't you use the word midwife there? You know the answer.
Well, I don't know.
You said birth educator. I want this birth educator at my birth. You didn't use midwife. Why?
I don't know. Why did I?
Because the word midwife has already been co-opted by the state. There is licensure around midwifery. So you don't call yourself a midwife. You call yourself a birth educator. Yeah. I actually call myself a coach. Really? Because in some one of my hats is I'm a coach.
Yeah.
Because if, let's say, I'm giving advice to somebody in, I don't know, Nevada, I'm not licensed there, I'm just coaching them. Yeah. Right? It's a slippery slope, of course, because I'm a medical doctor. So like they can come after me if they want. But the point here is that midwife, if you're going to use the word midwife, you need to follow the rules of the state. And the state has not given you permission to use the term midwife, which is why midwives and birth workers and even people who are compelled by free birth, this is why they're so upset about this. Like, I don't want to be a midwife because the state has taken over midwifery. So I understand the plight. I understand why there's so much pain around this. There needs to be a way that we do this in support of families. Like, this is still us needing to get out of the way and putting families like your family back in the center and taking care of people the way that they deserve to be treated. And if you're advertising that, people don't bleed out at home births, like, you're full of baloney. They obviously do. And we need to be prepared for that as well. Unless you're accepting that, hey, if I bleed out and die, that's also okay. Not many people are going to say that. And most people...
There needs to be true informed consent on that. Yeah. Like what is realistic.
You have to be honest, and you have to actually have like your ducks in a row in order to do that counseling. I mean, you see how much I prepare for a freaking podcast. How much do you think I prepared throughout my life to counsel people around birth work, I mean, this is like a never-ending story of constantly revisiting. What do I think I really know? What am I more curious about? What do I absolutely have certainty about? And then you just keep reworking it. You just keep molding it into something that actually fits. And then you personalize it. But it takes time. You can't just go to a weekend workshop and just hang a shingle unless you want to be doing harm to families that just don't know. You call yourself a birth worker. Okay. Attend my birth. I've only attended 5. Okay. That's okay. If you're okay with that, consumer. But we need to be very transparent. There's a lack of transparency everywhere in the government, everywhere in our medical system. It should be like obvious that we need to be transparent with one another. And that I think would solve a lot of it.
Man, this has been an epic chat, dude. Is there anything else you want to share as we're wrapping up?
Oh, I'm sure there was more, Alec, but this has been awesome.
We'll do a part 2.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
Yeah. We'll do a part 2 sometime. That sounds good.
Thank you so much.
This has been a lot of fun. And I just want to thank all of your listeners too. You've got like one of the most enjoyable podcasts because you're doing work here that's really, really courageous, not for the reasons I think that you maybe realize, but because it's almost like what do we have to lose at this point? Like if we're not going to start actually speaking to some of these things and in the way you do it through the lens of curiosity, if we're not going to be curious about things, we're just going to continue to be stuck in the mud. And there's not too many podcasts where you're actually exploring and asking questions and being humble with the conversation. And I just want to thank you for that and thank your listeners for making this podcast so like highly sought after. So it's a huge honor for me. And even though I just got this tattoo done, it's been like,
I love how it took like 3 hours into the episode for you to, oh, by the way, this like plastic thing underneath my shirt that I've had this whole time.
yeah, I have a touch up here. I didn't even mention it throughout. Yeah.
It's all good, man.
But yeah, thanks to you. I really appreciate you having me here.
Bro, likewise. Thank you for being here.